So I felt that was a bit pointless on that. And like I say, our roads haven't been fixed in the past 50 years basically. They've remained the same. The reason for this was because we're putting a dwelling, or another dwelling, on the same title as what we've got. And this same title was the one title that had the other block included in it. So it didn't remain a separate title because we'd bought it off the neighbour. It got lumped in with it. We didn't get a roading contribution back from the council because of that. Like would have been better to have kept maybe that separate and built a house on that. Now the other objection I've got to paying this is in 1988 we bought a block of land at 240 Main Donalds Road. When we bought it at auction, it was stated that the road would be formed, and as of yet I've not had it formed. It is just a grass paddock still. When I inquired at the council previously, the records from the old Eyre County were lost in a fire and they have no record of it. We have another road, Riders Road, which is on part of the property that hasn't been graded for 12 months now, but is on request. I've got to ring up to get it graded. Admittedly, we are only one of two people using it, but to me that's not good enough when we're paying the rates on it. Our total rates for our property is $28,320, of which $9,700 goes towards roading. Now this roading has now got 4 houses on it, not 3, and the dairy shed. Now that works out at dividing it by 5, $1,941 per property or per house. And remembering that these are farm workers' houses, not lifestylers who are using the tram road up and down the road every day. The 4 hectare blocks apparently pay between $600 and $700 a year in roading rates. The Oxford house that we own pays $350 a year in roading rates. Now if these people from Oxford are travelling on the tram road every day to work, which probably only half the district is, then are we not subsidising them? The grading of the roads, especially Northview Road, Wolfs Road and Sheets Road, has gone from once a month to every second month roughly. Now we've not had a reduction in rates on that. We'd sooner see it sealed and then we wouldn't have to complain all the time on it. But the Northview Road after the last rain and grading have become more like a mud track rather than a shingle road. Half of Sheets Road has gone from being graded every month to every 3 to 6 months. One house down the end of it, but that's, yeah. I just feel that we have been ripped off by the amount of rates we're paying and the way the roads have been acted. Now there's another piece on Points Road that has just been redone or patched up, and already after 2 months there's already a hole formed in it. Now it should not be up to the council to be paying this cost. If Cyclone can't do the job properly, then either 1, get rid of Cyclone, or 2, they do it at their cost. We had written a letter to the council, Mr. Dan Gordon, Joan Ward and the 2 Oxford Eyre County councillors back in June, and we addressed 1 to all councillors, which everyone should have read. So really, in conclusion, that I just feel that either we will pay this money as long as the road outside the houses is sealed, or if not, we'd like to see a deduction in rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryden. Very clear what it is you want to see. Do we have any questions for Mr. Bryden? Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Bryden. You talked about a water test that you had done when you did a previous house, or what date was that?
That was done when we bought the block of land next door.
And when would that
We had
be?
to get that done. That was done 8 months before we
Okay.
put in consent, and it had to be within 12 months of consent.
Thank you.
And at the time, the Waimak district was testing that well because it was below the effluent spill that appeared last year.
Thank you.
There appear to be none. Mr. Palmer, next steps from here.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Had to stop and pause there for a second. Thank you. Look, Mr. Bryden's raised a number of concerns about a number of elements of the council's business, but predominantly roading matters. There is some roading maintenance issues which I know our staff have talked to you at times about some of those matters, and I haven't got an update here that I can provide the councillors in respect of, but that is one matter. Whatever the level of service that the council decides for its particular roading network, we should ensure that that's delivered on. If we're not, then we need to address that. So that is something we need to follow up in our roading team. The more substantive matter which Mr. Bryden brings to us about the development contribution, it is a roading contribution that is applied to every dwelling in the district. Any new dwelling or any new lot created for the purposes of residential development or for that matter commercial development incur that same roading development contribution, and Mr. Bryden makes reference to a couple of roads which he was advised by staff, or a couple of projects, Tram Road and Ashley Bridge. That contribution actually contributes to a far wider range of projects than just that, but I would appreciate from Mr. Bryden's perspective very few of those are centred anywhere near his property is at present. That is a council policy. If the staff don't have a delegation to waive that charge, so only you, if you felt so minded to, would be able to do that, and for us to do that we would need to bring a report to you as council in respect to that matter. So if that's what you would like us to do, then we can do that for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. How does council feel about raising a report on this matter? Is there any indications? Feel there's a need? Councillor Redmond?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I've got to get it right too. I would be in favour of a report coming to us to address the issues that Mr. Bryden has raised. It may or may not be favourable for Mr. Bryden in the outcome, but I think it's something that we need to look at to make sure there are no errors or mistakes, and that what is being applied to him is fair in context. And it may be it is, I don't know, I don't have that information. I think Mr. Bryden is talking about fairness and the levels of service, and I think he's taken the time to come along and talk to us, that a report would be useful that we could consider.
I echo that sentiment. I think that there's absolutely no harm in looking into this further with a report, and there does seem to be some inequities there that he's discussed with us, and I would like to see that delved into a bit more deeply.
Okay, no objection to that. Appears to be none, so we will request a report back to us, Mr. Bryden, which will inform us of exactly your case and make a ruling on that report. And yes?
As for final consent, sign off on the house has not been done because we haven't paid for the roading contribution. So, we have been threatened that roading, because we're waiting for the contribution, the consent will not be done, so it will be put on hold and would have to reapply. Will that be put on hold? Do you know?
What Mr. Bryden says is not unusual for where there are still contribution. I accept that they're contested in this case, where in the normal sense, when contributions are unpaid, then code of compliance would usually be withheld until such time as they are paid. I think the council's position on that, we will try and get a report back to its next month's council meeting, so with that we can consider the code compliance matter at that same time. If that's the only matter that's outstanding in regards to the code compliance, I presume you've had final inspection and that's been given a tick.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. We'll look into that element as well. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Bryden. We'll let you know when that's happening, and you may wish to come along and listen to when that report is presented, of which you're most welcome. We'll be in a public meeting, I would imagine. We'll be in the public meeting, so you're welcome to come along and listen to that being presented, and we will see where we go from there. Thank you very much for taking the time to come see us. Thank you. I have no adjourned business on the agenda. There is no COVID-19 report this month, apart from the fact that we will be talking probably a little bit about that in the public excluded shovel-ready project discussion a little later, and so that will come up then. Item 7.1, Duncan, welcome. And that is pages 55 to 78.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this report is to provide annual update on progress with the regeneration projects. A reasonably successful year for the regeneration program in the last year. A number of projects completed and a number also soon to complete as well. Although the overall message is our planned expenditure is still tracking slightly behind where we would like to be. We are catching up, and I expect that by the end of this current financial year we'll basically be caught up with our capital project spend to where we plan to be. So another key thing that's happened in the last year, obviously the disestablishment of the Regeneration Steering Group, so most matters now being considered through the Kaipoi Tuahiwi Community Board. Majority of the work in Kaipoi East regeneration area is soon to complete, and it's probably fair to say that there's almost a shift of focus to the Kaipoi South regeneration area, where majority of the projects over the coming year and a bit will be down in that area. The report, a lot of facts and figures. I won't go through all those. Happy to just take questions if there are any on that. There's a wee summary though on page 57, just the pie chart there, just showing you the general status of how we're progressing overall for all of the projects in the program, and that includes the projects in the Kaipoi Wharf and Marine Precinct area as well. There's some, just on page 59 in section 4.11, just got a list at the bottom there. There's a few projects there that are either on hold or delayed or behind schedule. Some of those now have been deliberately pushed back as a result of the replanning following the COVID lockdown. Probably won't talk much more on those. It's probably reasonably fresh from the last meetings you had. Page 61 in section 4.15, we've got a section there just on key actions or items requiring resolution. first one there, Heritage and Mahinga Kai, we actually have a report to the Mahitahi Committee later this month, just setting out those co-governance arrangements and talking through the concept plan. So it's good to make a start finally on that project, and that will run over the next 4 odd years. The Rural Land Uses Establishment is a work on with the Community Board, obviously with the Whale Aquasports proposal. That factors in some of those decisions around rural land use for a big chunk of our rural land areas. The War Memorial Area landscaping has now been deferred. The Rowing Precinct project is still on hold at the moment because that's subject to us advancing the discussions in the project with the Kaipoi Croquet Club relocation. We will come back to you with the club rooms business case as council requested. Reserve naming, we think that we'll be able to accelerate that a bit now through the Heritage and Mahinga Kai project as well. A lot of it relates to getting Runanga approval of some of the names we've proposed there for the reserves. So, other than that, sorry, we'll just draw attention perhaps to table 7, which is on page 65. That's just a summary of the recent and current projects related to the Norman Kirk Park area in Kaipoi East, and any projects associated with that, like the road upgrades and the enabling works we've already done. At the moment, our forecast there, just for those projects, is actually tracking to around $205,000 over budget. We are working on that still to try and bring that into line. That does include $100,000 of remaining contingency for those projects, and most of them are actually nearly finished, so we're hoping we don't need to dip into that. That also does include $105,000 of costs that were directly related to COVID-19 delays on the contracts. So apart from those that would have been on track. And then the next table, table 8, which is just related to the marine project specifically, they are on track at the moment to come in on budget. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Duncan, for a full report. Councillor Williams.
Hi, Duncan. I just wondering if you could fill us in a wee bit of information on the leasing of the pontoons. We had some interest originally. Have we got people contracted to take sites?
To my knowledge, there were originally 4, let's say, tangible responses.
Councillor Williams, can you just turn your...
responses to the original request for expressions of interest. I'd need to get an update from Green Space team who look after the moorings. I know they were working with at least one who I understood was not far away, but there's no signed agreements at this stage to my knowledge. But I could find out from the Green Space team and provide an update to councillors after the meeting if you like. Yep.
Just further to that, Duncan, I just wonder whether that group that dealt with that in the first place could be recalled and just have a further look at what's happening around that space.
Yes, yeah, I can
Council
arrange.
appointed group that's there.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yes, Duncan, just curious about the BMX line. It's got NA for the difference. Sorry, it's just feedback. You've got a $99,000 budget and you've said you've only spent $7.5, but you've got NA as the difference. Can you just explain why we don't have 90,000 credit?
Yeah, that one's because that was actually an externally funded project. It was 100% externally funded. So the 99 was perhaps in excess carryover from the previous year. So the BMX project came in on budget. $99,000 got carried over, but we only actually needed $7,500. So it's not actually money left over that we can used to balance against the other projects. Because, as I say, more budget was carried. There was actually previous spending in the previous years that took that project right up to its full budget of 310,000.
But shouldn't that reduce the figure in that column, the first column then? Really, you should have that figure showing us just 7516.
Yes, could have done that. Yeah, that's the budget is what's shown in our financial system at the moment. But yeah, the money was actually spent in previous years. And the only reason that that line is treated different to the others is because it was a 100% externally funded project.
Just wondered then, Duncan, in the next report, if you could just have a wee paragraph to explain that. Sure. Any further questions? Do we have a mover for the report? Moved, Councillor Blackie. I'm happy to second.
Duncan's covered it all very well. Progress is good as the weather and COVID allow, and I'm pretty happy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Duncan, for a full report like you normally supply to us. It's pretty self-explanatory, but that piece that Councillor Barnett has inquired on, I think, could just do with a little bit of an explanation in the next one. So, thank you. Any further speakers? Right, a reply. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Next report is 8.1. Lindley. Lindley. Pages 79 to 110. The draft cemetery strategy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This report seeks your approval to go out for public consultation on the draft cemetery strategy. I think I've seen most of you at either the boards and at the briefing that you are well aware of that we were developing this strategy, and now's the time to consult with our community as to what they think about the management and ongoing looking after our cemeteries and what they want as our community changes. And I'm hoping that this should all be fairly straightforward for you. One thing I will say is the graphs on page 8, there is an error in the calculation, and I will be updating those graphs this afternoon prior to this document going out for consultation. I had underestimated how much availability of land we had, so that will be updated and go out in the consultation document. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Questions about Lindley or Marie? Councillor Doody?
Lindy, I'm not too sure if I can actually ask questions, seeing I own a plot, or 2 plots. So have I got a conflict of interest? No, I can't stand on them. Just with this report going ahead, I'm just interested with the Birch Hill Cemetery, where there's no ashes option there. What is the ruling, beside that one with?
There's no dedicated ashes plots at that cemetery, but people are still, if they've got a family plot, they can inter ashes there.
So that means that any local person that wants to be buried there have to buy a full-size plot, like what used to happen in Oxford.
It's not quite that straightforward. If you have a plot with a burial in it, you can inter ashes in that plot.
Yes.
But you can't buy a burial plot just to put ashes in.
Right. Mm. Interesting.
Supplementary to that, why?
Well, it's about the use of space, really. If you're just interring ashes in burial plots, then you're going to fill up the cemetery really quickly, because each burial plot is of a size to take a casket. So it's about managing space, and there may well be, I don't know the Birch Hill Cemetery very well, I have been there, there may well be an area where an ashes interment area could be built, but it wouldn't be a good idea to start just allowing burial plots to be used for ashes only.
Can I just carry on? That was the reason why I'm asking, is because it's not really a large, well, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
No, and that was why I'm just asking, why is council not looking seriously at having ashes, you know, a smaller plot area where ashes can be used?
It's not something that has been considered
Okay.
before, but this is certainly the opportunity to do that. And if the councillors felt, or the Oxford board felt that that was warranted and there was space for it, then this consultation, this strategy certainly gives you the opportunity to do that.
Councillor Barnett?
Lily, reading through some of my local government news today, I note the government are consulting on burials and cremation, and is any of that legislation likely to affect our strategy at all, considering that the consultation is out at the moment?
Last year, we submitted to the consultation on the Burial and Cremation Act, and yes, if some of the suggestions they have in that consultation document are brought into force, it could have significant impact upon our management of cemeteries, but it's really about the management, the day-to-day management, rather than the strategic direction for this council around available cemetery land and that higher level management of that land and acquisition if needed. So we're keeping an eye on that piece of work that's going through. It's not due to close now until October, I think. So I would imagine it'll be early to mid next year before we actually get any legislation actually coming through. But yes, we are keeping an eye on it, but we are going to develop a policy as in conjunction with this strategy, and that will certainly be the place, I would imagine, if there are any changes, legal changes, that we will have to take account of them in the policy itself.
I guess just supplementary, so there's no danger that if someone gives you a submission at this moment in time and we react to it, that then that goes against the actual policy that the government's going to put into legislation. There's no risk of that?
I think there's always a chance of a risk, but these strategies are like any document that the council has. If we need to amend them, put in an extra piece, we can do that on request or as required. So it's not stuck for the next 6 years. We can react as the changes in legislation come through.
Councillor Minnie?
I think most of my questions have kind of been covered with Wendy's subsequent ones, but yeah, I would definitely be interested in seeing us look into ashes interment in the Birch Hill Cemetery.
Your question is?
But my question is, you said that ashes can be interred in an existing grave, so where a family member has previously deceased and has been buried there, then you can inter ashes of subsequent family members in the same the same plot.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Redden?
Thank you. I just wondered, what seemed an easy matter becomes quite complicated. Could you clarify the demand in relation for burial requirements? Are reservations, reserved plots, included or taken into account in your projected demand?
Yes, they are.
So the demand would have been reduced by the level of pre-sold plots?
Yeah, I will check on that, but yes, I think that's what I did. I have to go back to my spreadsheet. As I said, I've found I miscalculated, so I'm redoing it now. So I will go back and check that to ensure that that's happening.
Right, thank you. Second question, you've asked that we impose a moratorium. Why should that be necessary?
We actually We have one on at the moment, and we put that there just when the COVID measures came into effect, because at that time nobody knew what the pandemic was going to turn out like. So that moratorium is still there. Once you start discussing cemeteries, it may encourage people to go in and reserve plots, which would just exacerbate the issue about there being sufficient plots available. The other thing is, in this coming LTP, you'll probably be looking at reviewing the fees, which again could result in a lot of plots being reserved. So we felt that while these discussions are taking place, and it's given the council the opportunity to get to understand the supply and demand situation a little better, it was a good idea to just not reserve plots at the moment.
Councillor Bryan?
Thank you. My question was about the moratorium as well. You don't envisage that that's going to cause a problem, the fact that we haven't had reservations for so long, as far as staff's concerned?
It hasn't caused a problem so far. Where there is a burial, then we're allowing reserve plots in conjunction with that burial. So, for example, the spouse of somebody who dies can reserve a plot, and there hasn't been a demand or any issue about not being able to do that.
And just a quick one again on Birch Hill, sorry. Just looking at, there's no land. There's 33 and 75, we're making 108. So I take it there's 108 burial places available at Birch Hill, and then it's full. Yeah.
Councillor Doody?
Just one more question, please, with the Cust West Eaton Cemetery. Bearing in mind that you've got two areas up there, which is there's two different levels. One's Presbyterian and one's Anglican, I think, whatever. Yeah, someone's higher up than the other. The thing that I need to know is that with each of those areas, is there enough land to grow and develop more sites for both areas?
There's actually a lot of land in the
Yeah, I see there's a
cemetery
lot of
area.
land
Yeah.
there.
It's a big L-shaped piece of land, so there's plenty of room there.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, we have some recommendations. Someone prepared to move Councillor Doody, seconded Councillor Doody.
Thank you. I just would like us at some stage to have a little bit more discussion on this, because I can see where we need to perhaps tidy things up a little bit more, but that's up to the community at large to make recommendations as well. And just the other thing really, as I've said, we've ordered 2 plots and but we've done that in hindsight so that our children don't have to make that decision. And I think we find that a number of people have done that so that their families don't have to go through that trauma of finding a plot when the time comes around. And that was really the only reason why.
Thought you were going to get away early, didn't you? 8.2. Yeah, yes. Mr. Markham. It's actually 111 to 132.
Good afternoon. So there are 3 components to this item. One is a cover report which gives a little bit of background to this issue and how it comes to be before you. The second is a draft climate change policy. And the third attachment is, as an attachment, is an extract from a regional format for a initial climate change risk screening that Waimakariri District Council was party to back end of last year, early this year, as a regional initiative. Really, the purpose of this initial policy statement is to ensure the council has, in the public domain, as I say, an initial statement that acknowledges the significance of this issue, and in the context of part of the policy sets out the suite of actions that it proposes to take over time to address this issue. As you know, this is a particularly difficult issue in the sense of some very significant long-term implications building over time, but the effects of climate change are evident in the short term. And in the policy and legislation space, it is moving quite quickly as well. And some of you will recollect the announcement yesterday of the first national level risk screening for climate change vulnerabilities in New Zealand. The suggestion is to seek some initial community views on this draft policy. Let's see the extent and nature of that feedback, but a view would be to then leave the draft to lie on the table and as a draft, and to consider when you are considering the long-term plan in March for a release in March next year, a more substantial consultation in relation to this issue. It will, you will see, begin to impact some of the budget provisions for the draft long-term plan. Between now and then, the second and third stages of the regional climate change risk assessment will be completed, so we will have a new tranche of information. There will be a government confirmed through the September elections, and we will get to see what the national program from what would inevitably be in time a speech from the throne as to how the incoming government proposes to address that in the next 3 years. So this is a contingent approach that we're recommending, but it is important, we felt, and the climate change portfolio holder, in discussion with Councillor Mailings and the Mayor, that there is in the public domain a statement of intent by the council in this area. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So I'm just, sometimes things get mixed up between sustainability and climate change. I just wonder if you could explain just please why we're dealing with this in isolation.
Sure. So you'll also recall that the council has a first stage climate sustainability strategy, and that is in scope is at the corporate level, which is about council sustainability practices and its role in that regard as an organisation. And it also, in recent monitoring reporting on the implementation of that, has highlighted, and you've had a briefing about further pushing that out into stage 2 and then again into stage 3. So that is a parallel piece of work, which is probably more focused around the emissions management side of things as it relates to climate change, whereas the climate change response strategy is going to be much more dealing with adaptation. So how does the council adapt its substantial investment on behalf of the community and infrastructural assets over time as climate change impacts become more significant, and obviously particularly in the coastal zone. And we also have a further strand of work through the district plan. So in time, as each of those components of sustainability and climate change are further progressed, there will come a time when, from a staff point of view, we will recommend to you integrating all of that into an overarching strategic framework. But each of those components are moving at slightly different paces in different ways at the present point in time. And there is a space there in terms of climate change at the moment.
Any questions? Councillor Barnett.
Just a couple of questions, Simon. The Climate Change Response Amendment Act is predominantly focused on zero carbon, although adaptation comes later. So how is our climate change strategy linked to a zero carbon strategy?
So there are a couple of angles to that. One is our response strategy in terms of adaptation will be principally led out of our district plan work and out of our infrastructural strategy and asset management. However, I think there's a reasonable expectation that local government, local authorities will be being asked through the Climate Change Commission work to play a role in emissions management, and we can reasonably expect that the national emissions reduction targets under zero carbon, as they are progressively put in place, there will be a role for local authorities in both facilitating, advocating, and through our own actions supporting that to achieve that very ambitious national target of zero carbon by 2050. Hope that addresses your question.
Not really. So why does our climate change policy not include zero carbon as an objective?
So there is an element of that included in the current sustainability strategy. The question that will come to you before you is in terms of the future role of the council in emissions reduction as you consider extending that sustainability strategy into the whole ambit of the council's operations, and then take that to the community, and remembering what we said collectively was we need to show practice and leadership in our own behaviours before we go out to the community. And I'm expecting that those subsequent stages of the sustainability strategy will flesh out that strand of work around what's the council's role in emissions reduction. And as I say, I don't know the exact time, but I think it's reasonable to expect there will be some pretty ambitious local and regional emissions reductions targets that are set and then embedded into local government performance targets.
So sorry, Vanessa.
Thanks, sorry,
BJ.
Under the draft climate change policy, one of the policy objectives is to provide for a planned approach to reducing emissions that contribute to climate change and adapting to its effects on communities and the environment. So I think it does, in some way, it's one of the major policy objectives. And again, under 5.3, implementation and monitoring, regularly measure corporate emissions and lead by example in reducing those. So there is, and 5.2, which is strategy and planning, ensure that low carbon climate resilient development is adopted as a key tenet of urban growth and development and land use decisions. So I think there is the expectation that it will address it, and I think as Simon said, the more we work on the projects, the more you'll find that they're better integrated.
Look, my apologies. Stay there, BJ. My apologies. While my name's on the front of this report, BJ's done most of the heavy lifting in terms of the work that's gone behind it. It was just that at the time it made the agenda, BJ was on leave. So,
Just a comment then, would it be possible in the introduction for that also to be included in the introduction, because the first thing you read doesn't actually say anything about that part. In the introduction on the climate change policy, would it be possible to add something as that being another objective of the policy? Because it only mentions adaptation.
okay.
All right. And the second question I had, sorry, with your indulgence, Mr. Deputy Mayor, The adaptation policy, should there be a separation between us adapting with council-owned infrastructure and assets and privately owned infrastructure and assets?
I certainly think there is, in time, through a full response strategy, a very specific reference to the council's assets. I say the council's assets, but the community's assets in the council's stewardship that are collectively owned from private assets, people's homes and their other and business investments. I think apart from our district plan responsibilities, and it's given added point by the discussion that's come in the media out of the national policy, national assessment that was released yesterday. Where does the responsibility lie? And that's a conversation that is still very, very uncertain and fluid. Sorry to not go on too long, there is some emerging practice, frankly, which is a third, and that's being led in the Bay of Plenty, where basically central government is accepting a third of the financial responsibility around adaptation, local government is accepting a third, or some councils have accepted a third, I can't say local government, and private property owners. And those sort of propositions are current discussions. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, it's just that is starting to become, we're starting to get down to the business end of investments in flood protection or retreat, where those sort of funding formulas are starting to be discussed. I would stress that's in the absence of any particular legislation or agreement, but we're into it already.
I mean, I could add a further comment to that, yes, it's, we did discuss the scope of the policy and thought that we would have a starting point looking at council's business because of the sheer scale of the project, really. But however, having said that, under policy objectives, our key policy objective 2 is to enable the council to provide transformational leadership that will ensure the long-term well-being, sustainability and resilience of the district's communities and businesses. So I think that the scope of that objective is broad enough. Once we start getting in the detail, the council is the community, so we do need to look at how we can make the communities more resilient.
Thank you. BJ. Councillor Blackie.
Simon, you talked about the interreaction of climate change and sustainability and hinted that one day they'll merge to form one. How are you going to put this out as a statement of, sure, it's just only a statement of intent, but going out for consultation, how do you put that out to the public without bringing natural hazards in as part of that trio? I can't see how you can separate natural hazards from the discussion.
It's a really good question, Councillor, everything's interconnected with everything else. That's what makes an ecosystem, and that's the whole issue of sustainability that it's all about. I do think, however, that there is a sufficient, and I'd probably point to a degree to the community feedback that we've got through the survey. There is a level of awareness about the specificity of climate change that is enough for us to be and needing to engage on that specifically. I don't think we're ready to have a wide-ranging community conversation at this point in time around sustainability in the round. I don't think we've done enough work, and I'm conscious that about how do we find the right balance between ensuring there is awareness and understanding and a policy direction around climate change from all of the other elements of sustainability. And I would point to sustainability isn't just about other aspects of the natural environment, it's about our economic sustainability, about social cohesion and social development in the district. And that becomes a very big and wide topic. So I do think we need to take a stepped approach to this, but I do acknowledge there is the potential for people to say, well, what about X, Y, or Z? And let's our recommendation is to put this out, albeit with some amendments now, and get a first round reaction from the community to it. And if that's saying we want to talk to more about this, we want to talk about it in the context of wider sustainability objectives, then we'll bring that feedback back to you and make a subsequent recommendation as to how to do that.
And in the light of that, we've got 20-something pages here. How concise and focused a format do you intend to put that out to the public? Because I think the amount of info there will just overwhelm them.
Sure. So we would not, our focus would be using the digital platform that we now have, and some of you will recall the report results that we presented to you or circulated to you around the recovery planning topic. We would make that a pretty brief digital website presentation, but we'd have the supporting information that is available for those people who want to see and know more about it. So our challenge will be to produce a cogent, short narrative for a web page that picks the eyes out of a climate change policy issue, but then gives you links to the layered information that supports that.
My question is for council is, how are we going to manage serving our large network of roads if we've got to get down to this zero emissions?
That's a pretty big question for us all, and there are a lot of unknowns in this space, and a lot of questions that council will have of central government, that the community will have of the council, that householders have about what's my role in this, and I readily acknowledge that challenge, but collectively there's something like the thick end of $1 billion of community infrastructural assets that to greater or lesser degrees will be impacted. And you may recall we're party to a local government New Zealand assessment of the vulnerability of our assets, and I think for Waimakariri district that was of the order of $700 or $800 million worth of assets. Now that's not just to not scare people, that's not to say they become useless or they're non-functional, but those are assets that are in positions and situations that are vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And as part of the work on asset management planning and our infrastructure strategy, we need to more closely assess that and what that means and what are the mechanisms that are the options that are in place. Last very quick comment. It will come at a time, and we're not ready to have that conversation yet, I don't think, with the community about what to defend, how to adapt, and where to retreat. And that's pretty clear from the national assessment that that's a conversation that needs to be had with the New Zealand community pretty soon. I guess we're all right now reeling from the impacts of COVID-19, and we're getting our head back above the parapets in terms of the other bigger picture, longer term strategic issues. So, but now's not the right time for that would be our view, but it needs to be soon.
And perhaps I could add to that, the climate change response strategy and the sustainability strategy, we're going to have to do some serious thinking about some of that stuff. Like, for example, as far as I'm aware, there's things we currently do, like purchasing pipes, that there's not, as far as I'm aware, there isn't the technology at the moment to offset the carbon emissions that are made in producing those pipes. So we need to look at strategies like, do we plant more to offset the costs that, you know, we reduce the costs as much as we can, but there's a point we can't go any further. So what do we do to offset those? Do we have, you know, there will be budgetary implications of we might have to start paying for some of those emissions and so on and so on. So that's certainly stuff that any strategy will need to look at in terms of a possible range of responses to those issues.
Thank you. Just a question from myself is around this report, and given you've given us the explanation of the difference between climate change and sustainability, then added on top of that is the next report, of which is consultation as well. How do you think our public's going to go between confusion of the next report on natural hazards as well as going out on climate change at the same time for consultation? And look, I absolutely accept the argument that there is no good time. I accept that, but these are pretty close.
They are, and I'd have to say I think the next report on natural hazards, we should get going on the engagement around that first, and get it out of the way, but provide a clear run for that. We have more discretion, I think, in timing about when and how to go out with the community on this wider ranging, higher level kind of document.
Sorry, two more questions that have popped up during the discussion. When I look at some of the table in the back, there seems to be a lot of items that I would consider regional council responsibilities. How are we going to, is this table part of the document that's going to be released to the public? Obviously it's in the public view, but how are we going to confuse regional versus territorial responsibilities in this climate change strategy, or are we even worrying about that?
Right now we're probably not worrying about that. It's an initial first pass risk assessment, but I think you highlight an issue about what will be the future role and relationship between regional councils and district or city councils in this area, and that's a conversation that isn't easy to encapsulate in the short term.
Second question was, at some point earlier in the term, we asked that every report that comes to us does have a climate change category in it. Has that been progressed or discussed any further?
So I have a piece of work that I'm hoping to complete by the end of August, which will be some modifications to our report template, your report template, which sets out, provides for a more specific. At the moment it's implicit under the title Community Implications, and we want to, in that section of the reports that you receive, we want to tease that out a little bit, so to make that those connections. I think it's helpful to have had a draft climate change policy to refer to as a reference point in those reports. So to some extent it's appropriate that this comes before we, and it's no disrespect to colleagues, but what do I say about this? How much do I say? How much is needing to be said? And I regret that in some respects we'll be telling you more about what we don't know than what we do know. So it's finding, I'm wrestling with a little bit of balancing in that template update, and we've been looking at other councils and how how they have wrestled with that. I'll have that with you soon.
Simon, well, good questions, and you have a question, Councillor Redden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. In this policy, somewhere it says we give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. The principles, as I understand it, are partnership, protection and participation. How does this policy align with the Ngāi Tahu anchoring the foundation strategy? Are we all on the same page and working together?
So the Ngāi Tahu strategy is a really high level strategy that sets out their vision for the future of their people, and to get into more strategic actions, they were going to go and do a whole lot of consultation in the various runanga. So certainly at a very high level document that they've got, there's nothing inconsistent with it.
Thank you. Well, they've been good questions, and so do we have a mover for the recommendation? Moved Councillor Mealing, seconded Councillor Barnett. Councillor Mealings.
You guys have all asked some excellent questions, and there are nothing but questions, and more questions when it comes to this, because it's huge. It is the single biggest thing that is facing society everywhere right now. We don't have all the answers yet, but we do need the statement of intent. We're not sheltering people from anything by telling them or not telling them anything right now, because people are already having these conversations in the public discourse. You know, people are ready and waiting for us to take action, because councils are at the forefront of this. They are at the coalface of climate change. We are the ones who have the first response to actually do something at a local level. And, you know, what's that phrase? Think globally, act locally. We're local. This is where it starts. So, you know, I mean, we have repeatedly signaled our interests in acting proactively to climate change for a number of years through a whole bunch of things since about 2011. You know, there's a whole number of legislative instruments that also direct us to take action. Other councils are already doing this. So, you know, as this report says in 3.6, council business on climate change needs to be embedded into council and not treated as an add-on. We need our community to know we are working on this space. We also need to cover our obligations and seek to reduce any legal and financial risks that we might encounter through any failure to act or adopt a policy. So I think that really it's a no-brainer to adopt this statement of intent, and I would like to move that I would like to move to A through D. So, thank you.
Yes, as Councillor Mayling says, this is a very, very large topic, and it's very, very important that we have something in writing that has a clear aim that we're going to keep this at the front of our mind going forward for the next 50 years at least, and ongoing. What concerns me a little bit though is I understand other councils are doing a lot in this space, but that's because they have immediate needs. They have houses washing into the sea. I've lived in Hawke's Bay and I've seen what the floods have been doing in Hamoana area for years, and it's getting worse. So they have houses falling off cliffs and houses falling off into the sea. We are fortunate we are not in that position right at this moment. We are seeing incremental changes, and we're seeing changes in weather patterns, but it's not as immediate, and that makes it harder for our community to actually realise we have to do something about this going forward. But I think it's really important to note that the developments in our coastal areas were approved well before climate change was even talked about. It's not this council's fault that those developments were approved. And what we need to do now is focus on local government's role in well-being and looking after our community. But I'm very cautious about us saying that we have funding to do this when it comes to private assets. We have to look after the community assets. That's our responsibility. We're charged to do it. But with private assets, we've got to have a much wider conversation. So, yes, we need to lead, we need to advocate, we need to facilitate, but funding is going to be an ongoing issue and an ongoing question. And I would like to see more direction from national, from central government than we've seen to date, because at this moment in time, that question is largely unanswered.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Any further speakers? Appear to be none. Councillor Mealings, you right to reply.
I don't actually think there's much more to say about that.
Thank you.
So
All right, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, Mr Young, this time. Pages 133 to 442, Natural Hazards Report. You may.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. This report in front of you has many, many pages to it, and I don't intend to work you through all of those. You have been fairly well briefed about this matter at 2 or 3 briefings, in particular to the DPNR committee, and I think you're generally well aware of the information that is being attached to this report, and also the intention for why this report is in front of you, in order that we can more freely release this information and make it available to our public. So I won't spend any more time on that. I think the 2 matters which probably are a little more pertinent for a discussion today is at the recent briefing, and I wanted to point this out even though it's in the report. At the recent briefing there was a request for the staff to pull together a bit of a summary of assumptions, and you will have noted in the report that this report does not do that, and when I began that particular task, identified that each of these modelling reports has dozens of assumptions underlying the information, and I felt it became difficult and even actually risky to attempt to pull some of those together in a document that was released, because it implies then that they are the only important assumptions, and that anything that isn't included in the summary document, of course, can't be all that important. And so I have not put that together here. However, I think the primary objective of the query that came during that briefing was to ensure that the information that is being put out has adequate explanation available to ensure that appropriate interpretation is made of it. So what we've undertaken to do there is ensure that there is appropriate guidance given actually in the electronic version where people can view this information, so that there is explanatory bullet points out to the side that will make sure that some of these key points, which were raised by both yourself and Councillor Stewart at the time, are made clear to anybody who's wanting to view that information. I think the second point that'll be worth some discussion, and I think it's probably best led by questions from the council rather than myself, is with regard to the planned consultation. And you all would have received correspondence from Councillor Barnett, who was raising some very good issues about why particular choices were made. And I think in particular, in light of the discussion we've just had, I think there is a real need to ensure that firstly the different or the communication on the different matters is clear and in context as we discuss it with the community, and secondly it would be useful to get guidance from the council today as to the extent they felt it was appropriate for us to engage with the community on this. What you see in front of you is the communications plan as it currently stands, drawn up by the communications manager, but it will be worthwhile, and we'll be very happy to engage with you on what level you feel is appropriate, both for this and also any other context that it needs to happen within. And that's why I have asked Trevor along. It's effectively it's his baby in terms of this underlying information. And also, as you're well aware, Trevor has a larger engagement process in the wings with regard to the proposed district plan, and it is important that both of those matters are thought about as we undertake this release. I don't know if you have anything to add, Trev.
I had a question first up, and it was just around that consultation, and given that the people who will be alerted to the effects of this will be the customers of builders and developers, do you think it would be pertinent to be targeting builders, developers, and so on, associated businesses, if you like, targeting them with this information and where to go to have a look at it, because they are the ones who will be the ones that are dealing with. Average Joe Bloggs probably won't know anything about it till you say that you have to raise your floor level by 1.5 metres, and it'll be the builder or the developer who actually alerts their customer to that. So I just, there's nothing in this plan that says that we're going to target that particular area, and my view is they will be the ones that will need it more than anybody.
Thank you. Look, we don't have the benefit of Alistair Gray here today to talk this through with you. He put the comms plan together in conjunction with the project team. Mr. Chair, very good point. Certainly, there's certainly targeted emails or consultation to certain groups, but I guess some of the organisations and builders and that use the information might benefit from it. We'll certainly look into that, see what we can do there.
Thank you. My question follows on from what the Deputy Mayor has sort of been talking about. I note that we're going out for consultation during October, which is a couple of months away, and in the recommendation we have G, which says note staff will be updating the information on LIMS as a result of this work. Where is the update at the moment? Is it because you've done this information, is it already being fed through onto LIMS, or do you do this exercise and then start the update? Because I mean that is immediately going to trigger public response, and they know generally people don't know anything about this at the moment, and it may be if you're already starting to update LIMS, that'll be the first time they see it.
So we've held 2 or 3 staff internal meetings since the briefing, and that identified in particular, a range of tasks that fell out of that, and one of those was for the Manager of Planning and Regulation, Nick Harrison, who has the task of ensuring that the LIMS and PIMS will be brought up to date. That task will take place after this particular meeting, and I understand also that the intention is that the LIMS will, the wording on the LIMS will be more generic. It won't be sort of property specific. It'll be along the lines of this property may be subject to flooding, and there is information available on the council website for for the applicant to look into further. So it won't be going down to a property specific saying you're at risk, you're not at risk. It'll just be alerting people to that particular issue. So it may not in fact change, the wording may not change that much from what it already is. Where it does, those general sort of words are already included in LIMS and PIMS.
Just moving on a wee bit from the geological hazards for the earthquakes and such like. Now, I know we were going to have a seminar but then COVID-19 got in the way. Are we going to still bring that earthquake scenario back into the community again? That one, I think it was Lincoln College did it.
Sorry, I don't recall the specific. What we have done is we have been in touch with the university.
Oh, that's university, yeah.
And they have provided information to us which have updated the particular hazard maps. But sorry, Simon, you may have...
Sorry, Councillor, you might be thinking of the AF8 exercise.
Yes.
So some of you will recall sitting in the downstairs, and hearing the folk from that project giving you an update, and I think there was an intent by the university to offer that into the community, and then life changed.
Yes.
So we can certainly,
to Oxford.
we can and in particular concern Councillor about the scenario. What does it mean in the top end of the district?
That's correct.
So we can certainly go back to Tom Wilson at the uni, and I'm actually meeting with one of his colleagues tomorrow, so I will note that to raise that. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Hi. I'm just a wee bit concerned about our assumptions and models and how accurate we've got all of our, particularly on the flooding side, considering just a while ago we had a model and all of a sudden it's been changed in different areas and a wee bit. What's the risks involved in that if we get it wrong? And creating a scare, for some landowners, and we may have it wrong. the accuracy of it, because it has altered already since. And you've already suggested we've got assumptions out there, and is the modelling right before we actually do a bit of scaring some of our people?
Modelling is always based up on assumptions, so there are a whole range of assumptions that lead to the conclusions that modelling reaches. That's the case right now, so we are advising people right now about their risk of flooding, and we would suggest that the modelling that we have, while being far from perfect, because modelling never is a significant improvement on what we have now. I think, as we've indicated in the briefing, there was a number of changes and improvements to the model that have brought it up to speed. In terms of the risk, we are in the role of pulling together the best information we have, and I think we and the community are entitled to rely on that information we have, and part of the task we've been doing in advance of the proposed district plan is getting a third-party review, which was led by Trevor initially, in terms of the adequacy of our underlying information that we were relying on. And that is indeed why we have gone to this step of carrying out this further work in terms of reports and investigations and modelling. And so where we have identified flaws that an independent third party has indicated are troublesome or potentially problematic, then we have taken steps to try and close those gaps. I think that we will always have the situation where a flood may occur, and it may not occur in some areas and in others. And there will always be challenges at that time with people questioning the basis of our underlying information. I'd like to suggest that we have gone as far as we think are prudent in terms of expenditure of money to get that modelling information as accurate as we can. It is always a choice to go another round and get further information, etc., and try and improve these models. We wouldn't suggest that that was good value for money to go any further with trying to improve these.
You are aware there are some engineers out there disputing some of our modelling facts and out there at this stage.
I think another way to look at it, Councillor, on top of what Donna said around the modelling, is how you use the modelling going forward into future years. And you may recall at a briefing at the end of June, Andrew Willis and Don talked a little bit about the proposed district plan policy response, and we're certainly coming back to the committee at a date to be confirmed later this month, possibly the start of next month, or going to plan once that date's confirmed. But that's around a floor level certificate approach, so that allows you to look at the specific context of a particular development, or at that time taking on board new understanding either brought on board by the applicant or that has developed since the modelling has occurred. And an example might be a bad example, that the modelling has factored in all roads and culverts as they exist today. Tomorrow, council or someone else may put a new culvert in down the road, which changes the flood modelling dynamic. But the modelling is dated, the day before, or the month before, or whenever it was. So by the floor level certificate or the approach we're thinking, you can pick up on that new information and apply it to the context of that, development, be it a house or whatnot.
Just one more point on that. I think we would potentially suggest also that the presence of these models was going to save our community many, many thousands of dollars, because in the absence of that modelling, we would be requiring everybody to get their own model to establish the floodability of their property. At the moment, with these models, each applicant has the choice of either relying on the model that is put in front of them, and therefore it is a relatively minimal cost, or going ahead and getting their own model done because they disagree with the results of our model. And we've just, me personally, have just been involved in a recent incident with an applicant in one of our smaller rural towns where they did disagree and went and got a specific model done in terms of their area. And that was quite legitimate, because our model is a district-wide model. So it is at a very large scale, covers the whole district. They picked out a small part of the district and got some very specific modelling done over their piece of land, and that showed far better results for their particular application, and that was accepted by the council as adequate proof and they were allowed to then build accordingly. If we didn't have an underlying model, that would be what we would require every applicant to do who walked in our door and asked for a development to occur.
Thank you, Don. Councillor Barnett?
Yes, a couple of these communities are quite well aware that there are risks, particularly Waikuku and Waikuku Beach and Kaipo, because of all the earthquake issues we've had. And if I was a person in that area, I'd probably go to the map and say, where's my house? So if a person is looking at their individual house, how would they then get someone to talk to about what that actually means for their existing property? That's not listed in the consultation plan. It might be a Simon comment or Trevor.
I guess broadly with the information that we've put together, we're looking to display that in a much better way than we've done in the past. I think at the 30th of June we put up, did it work? The technology showing the mapping portal, which shows the different layers of information available, so the liquefaction layer.
Yeah, sorry, just to stop you, it's not about the technical information, it's about how they have a conversation with someone to what it means to them.
So first and foremost, you can go to that information and then we'll make available how you get in contact with staff around that, be it 3 water staff or planning staff. So Chris Bacon, for example, operates a system that works very well now, helping to advise, probably in the instance that Don just gave an example of now, around looking at his model on the end of the phone, on the end of the email, whatever system he has in place to help that person out. Likewise, the same systems are in place with planning.
And that will be on the letter going to households as well?
So the letter coming up,
yes.
There certainly will be contact details around that, and I think Al spelt that out in one of the tables in the report there.
Look, as you were talking, I was thinking about some of the conversations we had on this topic and drop-ins of recent times as well. And you're right, there are people who will be anxious and will become anxious as more information becomes available, and it's a challenge. I think in those drop-in sessions, there is someone right there who can talk to them. I think we need to draw a distinction between information and advice. And it's the dilemma that council is in so many ways. We will do our best to inform you of what the situation is, what the facts are. But if you're seeking advice from an expert around intentionally taking deciding to put on a room or build a new home, etc., at some point we do need to say you will need to engage your own advice. My observation is my colleagues are pretty open and receptive to, as Trevor highlighted with Chris, to trying to do as much as we can to explain where we're coming from, what the information is, what the strengths of it is, but at some point we will have to say to people, you will need to engage your own expert advice depending upon your intentions.
Just a supplementary question to that. When we had the tsunami modelling came out, Civil Defence held public meetings in the evening that people could come and talk together about what the maps meant. Why aren't we taking that approach in the evening so that everybody can come to it and get that collective questioning and knowledge in this case?
I think that's, and again I'm thinking back to one of the sessions that we had where the issues that were in the people's forefront of their mind was around, well, what's the plan going to say? Now, we're not ready to say now what the plan's going to say, but I do think those, as part of the engagement around the district plan, we want to do a whole lot more, and you'll want us to do a lot more than put a notice in the paper saying the district plan's available. So it's those kinds of discussions that we will inevitably having right across the district around all facets of the district plan, but particularly in the coastal communities, about what natural hazards mean for them, where we're able to then point to the plan and the plan provisions, and they are out there in the public domain as alongside the information to then say, here's the way that we're responding to that, and that has a really good discussion. I have a little bit of concern, I'm sure like you do, that while it's important that we get the best information out there, we will get questions on, and as part of this round of engagement that we can't answer right now. But we'll certainly be intentionally doing that through the engagement that goes with a notified district plan in early 2021.
Just a little further, we have in here the 2 public drop-in sessions, and you've picked up that they're at 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock.
Terrible times.
And they were intended to fit in around the timing of the community board meetings as per their email. We're very open to this debate as it takes place after this question time to give us guidance as to what would be more appropriate and give us feedback. So those were initial suggestions from the staff. Taken on board your points and very happy to receive your guidance on what you feel is more appropriate.
I might just chip in there as well if I can. I guess there's some previous learnings around engaging with the community on district plan and in particular district plan hazards. So I can think back over the last 5 years, there was the PC 27, which was in 16-17, district-wide notifications, though it didn't go to letters and letterboxes, with drop-in sessions in the evenings, sort of 5 to 7 or 5:30 to 7:30, something like that. 20 people, more staff and councillors than real people. Similar again last year. Apologies there. So similarly last year with the hazards Let's Talk process about understanding people's appetite of risk. It was a 2-staged approach and 4 evenings at 4 hours each from 3 till 7. So the late afternoon into the early evening, 20 people across the whole events as well. So I think there's some learnings there about the time frames that didn't really make a hell of a lot of difference to that. Where we certainly got some good, where we get the most traction, at least this stage before we write to everybody as part of the district plan, is working with the council and its committee, working with the community boards and with all those other stakeholders and parties that are interested in the topic of natural hazards. So late last year, the second phase of that What's the Plan, Let's Talk risk discussion had a invitee session where we got most people. This room had 30 people in it. And we were up here talking about it. So that certainly gave us best bang for buck. So I guess those learnings have gone into what is in the paper for you today.
Look, I think you can design that as we go along. We don't need to design it
so
around the table.
just
we can go on. We can go on. I mean, the other example was last night, 6:30 in the evening, 70 people. If it's an issue people want to talk about, they'll turn up no matter what time of day it is. Now that's a general throwaway comment if you like, but I think we, rather than design it over the table, I think it's on board with the staff that they will take that on board and have a look at what those times will be.
May I just add one person to your list, and that would be real estate agents, please, as a targeted response. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bright.
Thank you. There is a question, Mr. Mayor, but it'll take me a bit to get there. Jess and I are building at Waikuku Beach. 2 months ago we engaged an architect costing $3,500. About 2-3 weeks ago we engaged a building engineer. He said he could design the foundation and assist with the bracing on the house. However, had we considered a deep geo, he cost $4,000. So we went with Davis Ogilvy at $4,500 to assist him to design the foundation for the build out at Waikuku. What's going to happen when that gets to council? Are you going to say that you're now going to have to engage somebody else to assist with the foundation? And it sounds a personal question, but it's not. I'm aware of 3 recent demolitions out at Waikuku Beach, and one of them, the demolition only occurred a week and a half ago, and I noticed on Sunday that there's already the markings for the build. So that's how quickly they're getting on with their process. So it's not, it's personal, but it's not just us.
So the process on an application for either a building consent or a resource consent will be that a floor level certificate will be sought as adopted by the council in terms of a process. That floor level certificate will advise you there will be a cost to that certificate. I can't recall what it is. I think it's $100 something to obtain that certificate, which will, if you accept it, be no further cost. It'll just be advising you as to the level to put your floor. Where the cost may then come in is if you feel that is excessive, you you dispute our particular number, and therefore there possibly would be further advice to come up with a different number. And we are expecting that could and possibly will happen for in particular multi-resident developments where those sort of impacts may be quite significant. So we would be hopeful in your instance, and I don't know any more detail about the geotechnical conditions, but in terms of flooding, that should be a relatively simple process as long as it was accepted between the parties that the floor level that we advised was appropriate.
So, reading the report and having attended the briefing and what have you, there's elements that are scary. But, you know, if given that, and others are in the same situation, it's scary. Based on your answer, we shouldn't be that scared. It's just WDC trying to prepare for the future and minimise risk. Is that what you're saying?
It is what I'm saying. However, where the dispute will come is where people have particular site information that they believe points out that our more general flooding assessment is overstating the case. So I think that's where, you know, we may be, for instance, you know, we'll have a floor height and then we have a freeboard above that. And so by the time we're finished, it may well be we're saying your house needs to be 700 or 800 or 900 millimetres above ground level or something like that, which is a not insignificant cost to add to a house. And so while, yes, it is with the right goals and objectives that we're doing this, it will, in certain places in the district, have a real implication on the cost of building. And that's where we do need to be sure that both the underlying modelling is as good as we can get it, but also then those assumptions we're making about what happens next to come up with that floor level are also as good as we can make it. And that is where you will be receiving and discussing the floor level practice certificate, which is where you will get to discuss what is it we're doing about that floor level to turn it into, what is it we're doing about that flood level to turn it into a floor level. And that's the next part of the discussion, which is not yet in front of you, but will be in front of you for you to think about.
Just remind councillors too that we are talking about going to consultation before we get to making decisions on this. So you know, it will come back to us for decisions once the consultation has taken place. Councillor Miller.
Not so much the natural hazards information.
We should be really clear. So this is the hazards information to go out, and here it is, community. Then it's about what we do with that, which is the district
things will come back to us, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Just going back to a couple of things that just popped out to me from Robbie's and Paul's questions. I just wanted to just clarify. So Dawn, are you saying that an individual, if they don't like what's been put on their limb or where their land sits in a hazard model or whatnot, that they can actually go and they can either choose to accept our modeling or they can go and get their own and then submit that to you? So they've got a choice of either saying, okay, we'll take yours that you've already done, or get independent advice.
Yes, that is correct. And to use the example before, it was in a development in Sefton, and our modelling showed a significant breakout from the local stream would occur and send reasonable amounts of water through this particular development. So they undertook to get a modeller, of course at a reasonably significant cost to them. So I'm not suggesting this is an easy path, but they had 20 or 30 houses that were going to be affected by this development. And so they chose to get us their own flooding report, and it predicted that flooding would not emerge from that stream in the same manner, and it significantly changed what needed to happen on their site. We, of course, peer-reviewed their report. We didn't just accept it as a given, and the peer reviewer and the modeller worked together and ended up accepting an alternative to what we had originally proposed for our flood modelling.
So what you're saying then is that if somebody is feeling aggrieved by some aspect of this, that they can actually go and provide an alternative. It's an alternative option for those people. question.
Can, but I'm not belittling. There is a cost involved in that is a real, probably a barrier for most people that may avoid them from doing that.
But there's that option. Right. Thank you.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, follow up from Councillor Bryan's situation. I'm a wee bit concerned. What would happen? Are we developing a system where if somebody wants to go through at a great cost to get a floor level at 300 metres from the ground level, 300 millimetres from ground level, and all of a sudden the neighbour that doesn't want to spend that amount of money, so they'll just accept the council one, and all of a sudden theirs might be 2 metres sticking out of the ground, 2 metres, and that has been put by one particular property area on our flood modelling. Could we be creating a staircase of houses at different levels that would be unsightly down a street frontage, for example, by doing it this way?
I think where somebody had developed information upon a particular property that the council accepted was fair and reasonable for that property, then we would be using that information to assess the neighbour's property as well. So we certainly, and as I acknowledge that our model is a district-wide model, so it is at a, let's call it a course level, and if somebody came in and said, well, here's flooding about my particular property, and it showed that 300 millimetres above ground was in fact the appropriate one, it went through the appropriate checks and was accepted, then we would not ignore that information when the neighbour walked in the door and said, I'm actually going to build. I'm not saying we would automatically accept it on the neighbouring's property, because there may be a number of issues which differentiated the neighbour from there, but all I am saying is we would continue to build our body of knowledge on whatever had happened in the past to advise what we were then going to advise people in the future.
Perhaps just further to that, probably the scenario more likely is in an established urban area where a house is demolished and then rebuilt and the new floor level applies. You could have existing houses that are have a substantially lower, perhaps up to a metre or so. In Kaiapoi, I think, are some of the pictures that we've seen where the floor level for a new dwelling as a replacement could be substantially higher than those adjacent to it, and that will look odd in a community, no doubt, and will create a number of neighbour stormwater issues that will need to be carefully managed as those height differentials are achieved, and it depends whether it's the floor level going up a metre and you've got a number of steps, or if somebody then tries to raise the adjacent, all of their land around it so they don't look like they're a metre out of the ground. They will create challenges as areas redevelop that are currently below the recommended floor level heights, and that's something we're going to have to continue to work on, and is probably going to be one of the bigger community challenges, I suspect.
And that particular issue raised by the Chief Executive is one of the matters that will be debated by you in terms of the policy response, and that is how do we deal with existing, infill areas in existing residential areas. So there will be potentially a specific district plan response to that you will have the opportunity to discuss before it gets adopted.
And just in brief, it's around townships such as Kaiapoi, where there's the option to mitigate, not just avoid. We'll talk more later, it's around existing use rights and any extensions to houses and the choice of rebuilding what you had or taking the option of building up higher. Then I guess another third component is certainly the displacement on neighbours and managing that. And a fourth is then around what would normally be permissible on a section in terms of could you build a 2-storey house on that section? So how does a house that's 1 storey built up slightly more implicate that? What is the overall height of the building? And what is the overall height of the building relative to boundaries in terms of shading and overlooking and those types of matters? So there's all there's a strategy as to how you can think about these things. We'll talk more later about those.
I'm prepared to move from the chair. Just adding C in the consultation, that targeted consultation to, and I don't want to say building industry, there's probably a much better name in there as real estate industry, to appropriate industries relating to this. So just adding that into C. Do we have a seconder? Seconded to Councillor Barnett. Right. Look, this has to go out. We have this information. It would be very irresponsible of us not to share this information. I've had my doubts with the modelling right the way through. I think this is the third change in the last couple of 3 terms that I've been here. And as we add in more mitigations that our district takes, the better that it gets. I think the first iteration that I saw was some years ago, which was given to us from the regional council that never even had the riverbanks in it. And the questions around the volume of water they were talking about wouldn't even fit through the Ashley Gorge. So we've made significant improvements on this modelling as we go through. And I think both Don and Trevor are absolutely right. You have to have a baseline in which to work off. We may not agree with it totally, but that is a personal thing. The modelling is the modelling. And it continues to be a moving feast, and it will continue to be a moving feast as mitigation becomes available. As to the floor levels, I just wanted to talk to the Trevor's last point, and I absolutely agree with him that if you're doing an infill situation, someone could build a 2-storey house next door to you. Someone could build a single-storey house next door to you. It could be a tiny home. The level of that will not make any difference as long as you meet the rest of the rules around the district plan, such as floodplains and shadowing on houses and all of those things that happen. I live in a street now where the corner house is an old-fashioned 2-storey house, which is actually the size of a 3-storey house of today, and that looks right into my backyard. My house is built at 800 off the ground. And I have 3 steps in which to get into my place. The place next door to me, which is only the year of the earthquake, is built on the ground. I already live in that situation you're talking about. But they met all the other rules of the district plan to build where they are. It makes not one scrap of difference to the fact of the floor levels. You could be at 1.5. If someone decides to do that next door to me, then that's, as long as they meet the rules that aren't going to shadow my house, and I accept the runoff of stormwater. I accept that, but that's part of mitigation in building and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. I think that it actually, some people see it as an eyesore. I don't. I actually think that it adds variety, and you don't end up with a whole heap of houses that look the same along one stretch of road. So I think it's actually quite helpful myself. I do know that in Kaipoi, the builder who works for me, he had to build his place up to 1,200. Somehow, by the time he'd got to the end of it, he was only at 300, but it added something like about $100,000 to his build. And that's the reality of where we're at. The costs of this in certain areas is going to be massive, and what worries me around that is, particularly in infill, that people won't build, and we will end up with empty sections within people's communities and start to break those communities down over time. We also have to put it into perspective about when and why and how these things will happen. So we have to do it. There is no choice. It needs to be done, and we have to stop mucking around deciding on when, why and how, and get on and do it. And that's what this does. So I hope that you will support it. Councillor Barnett.
Yes, I'm definitely going to support this report. It's absolutely necessary that we do this. We've got this information and it is necessary for it to be public, and I'm very pleased that there is a way that people can interact with it and actually see exactly where they are and what's happening. It has to go on limbs as soon as we have this information available. It has to be able to be tagged to the properties affected. The only issue I have a concern with is that we talk about floor levels and we're talking about rules going forward, and we have to do that for the district plan. We have to look at what's the most sense. But my concern is existing properties. These are actually people's lives and assets, and often their only investment for retirement. And it may well, it's potentially when people look at limbs, it can affect property value and sales. And that's the feedback I'm getting from real estate agents. Even with a recent application that's out there at the moment, it's already affecting house sales in the area of Rangiora. So this map going out is just extra information. It's another layer of information that may give people pause to think what happens. And the word flooding, as soon as you mention flooding, in Kaiapoi and Waikuku Beach, it's a very hot topic. It always has been. And I'm thinking of the psychosocial impact of that. People are going to be concerned, they're going to want to ask questions. And what we've seen when we've had community consultations is if we initiate it as the council, say, come along to a meeting, we don't get many people. But if the community initiate it, the drainage meeting at Waikuku, it filled Waikuku Beach Hall. There were 60 plus people there because they were concerned about an issue. They had questions. They organised a meeting and we sent staff to it. Now, that's how I see we should be doing this. The evening meetings in conjunction with a local group that's got the context to get the people there. And that's where you actually can be the most successful. Floor levels absolutely have to be done. But what I'm concerned about is just talking to people, making sure they understand that often the fear is worse than the reality. What will actually happen and the length of time we're talking that gives us time to adapt and mitigate going forward is the actual fear of something happening is often worse than what's actually the reality of it happening. And that's where we need to have these one-on-one conversations and these community conversations with those particularly affected groups in Waikuku Beach and Kaiapoi, as was done during the earthquakes and other natural disasters like the tsunami.
I will be supporting this, but I have got concerns about they're not making land anymore. And we've already had an example here of, luckily, the developer got his own engineers and overturned what the council had plainly wrong in their modelling. I wouldn't like to see parcels of land get overshadowed and foreseen because they think it's going to be a floodplain when actually it's not going to be a floodplain. So I think we've got to be pretty accurate in our modelling before we actually designate places that are going to be underwater, because land's not getting any cheaper and we're not making land anymore. We've just had climate change, we're actually losing land at the moment, so we don't want to be losing more land than what we need to. So we've got to be pretty accurate on our modelling before we actually turn around and say, well, that section's going to be flood prone underwater when it possibly may not be. And as Councillor Barnett's just said, it can devalue somebody's family's inheritance they've had for 30, 40 years, that long term the grandchildren are going to build on that bit of land, and all of a sudden they find they can't build on it because it's never been wet before, but all of a sudden it's sitting in a situation where it could be underwater. So I think we just got to be very careful that we get our modelling right and know exactly. And we've just had, well, I thought it was the second time, but obviously it's the third time we've had our modelling wrong and altered. So is there going to be a fourth time? Probably there is. So we need to be a bit more accurate with what we're doing. As I say, the risks are quite bad for the property owners that, and I know several property owners that have got property that they wanted to build on, and all of a sudden they found out the cost of building on this particular properties they've got is too great, and all of a sudden they've got property they can't do anything with at the moment except pay rates on it. So we have to be very careful on the way we go about it. Yeah, you know, just land's getting scarce now, and we don't want a development of nothing in an area of places where we could be building and quite comfortably building on as well. So
thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Blackie.
Just a couple of comments. Reiterating what I said on the previous item on the agenda, please ask Alistair to be concise with what goes out there. Our people at the coastal area, because this sort of thing tends to affect them more than arguably more than anywhere else, we're getting consultation fatigue down there by their own admission. They've had 5 years of being consulted, and okay, this has to go there, no argument about that, but it needs to be brief and it needs to be focused and almost a précis. You know, if you'll excuse the pun, you flood the market with information, you'll overwhelm them. They'll just back away, and all you're doing is scaremongering, and they're pushing up their anxiety factors without actually getting them to engage with the information they need. And the other thing to mention, just remember too, the Kapiti Coast Council incident a few years ago when Kirsten and others have mentioned this has got to go on the limbs. Just remember that council put natural hazard coastal stuff on the limb, everybody with a house on the coast saying you are living in a risk area, and they took the wealthy residents, took the council to court and won in the High Court and had the council remove that, which to everyone, or to my amazement anyway, because I thought it was actually common sense, but they won in case and made the council remove that information from the limb. So we've got to be just a bit careful about what we put on the limb.
Councillor Bryan.
Thank you. And on our induction tour in 1998, Gareth James was in charge of engineering, utilities and roading back in those days. And he stopped the bus on Waikuku Beach Road next to the lagoon and said this is flooded before, showed us pictures of flooding which extended right down through Pegasus all the way to the Waimakariri River, and he said it will flood again. It hasn't yet. But it will. I've got absolutely no doubt in my mind that it will, which is why obviously I'm going to support this. But as I mentioned when I asked those questions, it is pretty scary because, you know, I'm looking at a foundation which I thought was going to be perhaps 80,000, 90,000, and I'm looking at it probably another 50, 80,000 in the foundation, depending on what that floor level turns out to be. And I don't know yet because I haven't got the deep geo back. That was only done yesterday. But these are some of the questions that you know I would anticipate staff are going to be asked in this process. And yeah, but obviously it's got to be. You know, the other side is none of us want to put a beautiful house only to have the blooming thing flooded and wrecking televisions and all the rest of the carry on. So it's got to be done. I've got no issues with that, but it's got to be done delicately.
Councillor Redmond.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Councillor Blackie has raised the issue that I was going to mention about the importance of getting the information correct on limbs. I think that's crucial. This whole topic is actually very crucial to the district. And as Councillor Blackie said, on the eastern area in particular, just commenting on what Councillor Williams said, the coastline is actually accreting and growing, so we are making more land in our district.
Only in our district.
And the third thing I'd like to comment on is the engagement and communications. I quite like the comments in Councillor Barnett's email about going to where the people are. And I think people will want to know about their particular property, and you need to have a laptop or a map or some way of showing it to them. And I mean, if we do it, I think they'll come. We saw last evening in Kaiapoi, although it was a public initiated meeting, people did turn out, and it was a really good meeting and well conducted, so thank you to the staff who were there last night as well. So I think this is very important, and I'm more than happy to support it, but I do have reservations about what information goes on limbs and how it is presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ward.
Thank you. I just have listened to everyone, and I will be supporting this, but I think we also must remember that in the last few years there's been a tremendous amount of flood mitigation happening, and I think the situation has improved greatly throughout the district, and it's forever evolving and changing, and so we must be really careful that we don't become too scaremongering. We need to be honest, but we need to understand that we're always trying to improve the flood mitigation in our district and improving the risk. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Just no other further speakers in my right of reply. Just a couple of things really, just to reiterate that when we look at the modelling that was there, Kaipa was actually improved by plenty, if you like, in the latest flood modelling. So, you know, that's to be taken on board, and if that continues, then, you know, they'll be the highest place in the district by the time we get to the year 3000, if that continues. But I'd just like to point that out. The other one that it's about accuracy and where doubt comes from within our own district, and people think of their lifetime when they think about this modelling and how it works. You know, I can remember distinctly duck shooting down Lineside Road in a mai off the paddocks there, with the water above the fence line. Not one drop of water in Kaiapoi after the rainfall. Not one flood. Yet our modelling says we'll be a metre underwater. So they are the sorts of arguments which Joe Bloggs is going to bring to us when they wish to build or in this consultation, because we need to make sure that we have the right information and that it is correct. And if we can explain those situations and why there was nothing then and there will be now, then that's fine. But if you can't, then quite honestly expect some criticism from them, because as we know, they do work on their lifetime as opposed to what has gone before that. I remember back in my younger days, we were originally going to shift to Westport, and God knows why. But we got on our limbs, was given to us by the solicitor, was a flood that had happened there 70 years beforehand, and has, to my knowledge, never happened again. And I've lived in my home now for 36 years, so put that on top of that, it's over 100 years since that flood has actually hit Westport. So we did what every other person who buys a home did. Well, that was 70 years ago, don't give a damn, I'll be fine. So they're the sorts of things that we need to take into account, that it will, as Councillor Bryan said, it will happen at some stage and at some time. We don't know when it'll be. But that information that's on LIMS, we want to make sure that it's updated as often as we can, so that you don't get into that situation when it is given to people, that they actually take notice that it's the latest information that's on there. So look, I welcome this consultation. I accept all the ideas put forward for doing the consultation with the right people at the right time and the right place. Our staff try to do that all the time, so I think that that will be taken on board, and we will get the best out of it. So I urge you all to support that, although I think you've just about all said you are supporting it, so we'll wait for the ayes. So I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carry. Thank you. Right, item 8.4, which is Mr. Young again. Where are you, Mr. Oh, yes, he isn't. Pages 443 to 454.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I've invited Libby up to sit with me. I'm not sure if many of you have met Libby Hurley, but she works in our area, and Libby will be assisting me pull together the monthly report from now on. In terms of the monthly spreadsheet that we pull together, we put it in front of you, of course, on a quarterly basis, but we actually pull it together and discuss it internally on a monthly basis. So I thought it was useful for Libby to be part of this conversation as well, because she'll be quite critical in terms of ensuring you get the right information in front of you. The purpose of this report, I think, is to take into account some of the discussions that were had last year, when there was quite a lot of discussion and interest in improving our performance in terms of the annual report or performance against achieving the annual budget. And I think we all recognise that were 2 or 3 matters or a number of matters that affected our ability to hit a target that you would be, or hit an amount that you would be more comfortable with. And some of those were certainly performance delivery, and I think you've heard Mr. Cleary mention on a number of occasions various improvements we're making to our systems to try and improve our performance. But some of them also were reporting matters and noting, I guess, the clunkiness or the coarseness of the method in which we were reporting to you. One of the ideas that was floated, and I can't remember whether it was by us to you or by you to us, was to come back with a method of taking into account those particular projects which the council had less control over. We attempted to do that in a couple of the quarterly reports last year, but it was really just by no more than really a narrative. What we have done now is, with the help of the Minister of Finance, the Manager of Finance, is to pull together a couple of extra columns which we're asking our project managers to populate. And they talk about the planned likelihood of completion, and then during the year we will update that with the predicted likelihood of completion. Now, what we wanted to do by ensuring this report was in front of you before the year started was to give you confidence that we were setting our sights on a fair and equitable basis at the start of the year, not with a little bit of hindsight as month 1 and 2 and 3 had gone by and we were reporting to you in quarter 1. And we could see that, oh, we're already struggling, let's set a slightly lower bar. So the reason for getting this in front of you now is to ensure that we're all on exactly the same wavelength at the start of the year about what it is we're trying to achieve and get your acceptance of that. The second thing I'd note is that we have been very strict on ourselves in terms of the definition of council control. And so it may have surprised you, as it did surprise me, how fewer projects actually are affected when we brought this method into play. We had thought it would be more. But the fact that there is land purchase to be obtained, or there are consents to be obtained, or there is consultation with NZTA to occur, has not allowed us to say anything less than 100%. We have kept all of those in the council controlled, even though there are potentially quite significant issues that we need to work through in order to achieve our goal. And so we have, I hope you will see, by putting this information in front of you, I hope you will see that we have tried to maintain a very high level of discipline with regard to this. But what it has done is it has allowed us to select a slightly lower bar, not in terms of the budget, that will always remain our goal, but in terms of our predicted, well, our planned likely expenditure at the end of the year. What we have allowed to happen is that we will probably be altering the predicted likelihood of expenditure even on the 100% ones once the year gets underway. And that will be another reporting tool which we will report back to you during the year, where we start to, at the end of the first quarter, if we're starting to say, well, actually, we think it is less likely we will complete such and such a job, we would be signalling that to you, and you would see an early indication of what then we were signalling to you and be able to give us feedback accordingly. But I have not much more else to provide in terms of an update on this. I'm hoping it's relatively self-explanatory. One last thing I would note is that this numbering system doesn't make a lot of sense if you read it line by line, because often these particular jobs are either going to get 100% done or they're going to get 0% done. And we've put in 50% or 75%. We're never going to spend 75% of it. We'll either spend 100 or 0. But what that does do is when you average it up over 10 or 15 projects, is it allows the summing of that to be a more accurate reflection of what is likely to happen. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Don. Libby, do you have anything to add? And here you are. Are there any questions of either Don or Libby? Councillor Stewart?
Yes, it's slightly to the left field. Well, perhaps not. I remember when the Standard & Poor's come to evaluate this council, its ability to do the program within and spend the capital budget within the 12 months is an assessment that they do make, and they've been critical of this council in the past. So do you actually see this measure as assisting with our Standard & Poor's rating as a apart from, you know, it looks very attractive to us here that we will be arguably on, you will be on board far more than we have in the past, but does it actually have that other benefit? No? Yes? No? Mm?
Maybe. Look, anything which demonstrates better management over our capital program should be recognised and hopefully acknowledged by Standard & Poor's. Like you, they will probably say the proof's more in the pudding, so let's see what the results are over a period of time will more likely be their response. But if that's helping us get to a better place, or at least when we're not in a better place, we're at least in a better informed place, which is where Libby and Don are. They're not accountable for delivery of the program. They're there to help us understand who you should hold accountable and to what extent. And that's me and our leadership.
Thank you. Right, we have a recommendation on the table. Move to count. Oh, you have a question, Councillor Williams?
Council to, thank you. Is it common for the council to be making development contributions of $1 million for private enterprise?
So that's the sum total of projects, and they're usually ones where we'll do, you know, Oxford Road, I suppose, would be one out here where there'll be upgrades occurring, and some will be cost will be borne by the developer, but there is actually an improvement that the ratepayers or residents should share. So that fund is funding that share of works when a development occurs, which is, you know, assessed on a fair and equitable basis. So it's usually other improvements that are occurring at the same time as a developer is making a contribution, or sometimes it will be where a developer puts in a stormwater pond and it'll be bigger than needed, or because it's providing capacity to deal with other residential issues that aren't the developer's responsibility. So it's those sort of projects that tend to get picked up in that.
So in that particular instance, Councillor Williams, and I'm sorry I didn't print off all of those detailed pages, but there is $1 million in there, and I think it'll probably be the Pentecost. Is it the Pentecost Road Stormwater Management Area you're referring to? That is a significant cost, which is the council's benefit that we are obtaining on behalf of a whole range of other users who will benefit from that stormwater management area that they are building. I don't know if you've got anything further there, Jared.
Yeah, I think, Jim,
Yeah, just to clarify with Jim, does that mean our development contributions we're getting aren't great enough, and or if we're expanding something for future development, that will a development contribution will come off of that $1 million we've put aside later on?
Yeah, so if the cost that we're bearing now is because of other growth that is to be incurred, then that will go to a DC somewhere else in our calculation. For example, if it's Pentecost Road stormwater, management basin. I think there are other properties. There are 3 beneficiaries, I think, of that that I'm aware of. There is existing ratepayers. There are existing developers and the future developers. So the future developers' share of that would be ring fenced and then recovered through a development contribution at a later stage.
And in some instance, they are DCs that we've had in the bank for quite some time, as people have paid for them in the past, and now the infrastructure works to mitigate their effect of actually being there is only just being built. So we've taken those DCs from other developers, knowing that this work is coming along, and then contributing their share to that work. So we've basically played banker. That can also happen.
So eventually you'll be cost neutral then, so it's actually not going to cost the council anything. Because the other part of my question was, are our development contributions enough to cover this type of thing?
Two-part question there. Yes, except for that share that is a fair ratepayer share. So, when we upgrade footpaths, for example, on a new and connect, then we'll pay we may, or street lighting, then we'll pay a share there. So that will be a ratepayer. For the balance that is deemed to go to a for development contribution over time, the intent is for that to be cost neutral, although as Don says, we do play banker in the meantime. There is, in terms of are the DCs enough, we've had no developers coming to us in recent times saying your DCs are too low. They're quite the reverse, in fact. We're conscious, when we're setting DCs, we have to be very alert to what is fair and reasonable from a developer's point of view and from a ratepayer's point of view, and it's quite a hard balance sometimes to find, but we put quite a lot of attention to that, and the DCs, and you can see that some councils have just one DC for, say, sewer, and that's it, and it doesn't matter where in the district a new property will get a sewer DC, whereas in Waimakariri we've thought about it quite a lot. If you're in West Rangiora, you'll get a West Rangiora DC. We haven't paid the power bill. No. Thanks, Stuart. If you're in West Rangiora, you'll get a West Rangiora DC. You'll get a Rangiora trunk main upgrade DC, and you'll get an ocean outfall DC. So we've thought about each part of our district as to who are the beneficiaries of work and who should fund that.
You're moving. Oh, question?
I admit to being quite surprised with the comment you made about most of them being under council control initially. For those ones that we have some risks with NZTA decisions or with legal decisions or consent decisions, will you be looking more closely at those to try and perhaps spread some of that expenditure into the following financial year where there is that risk?
It's a really good comment. I think we recognise that our ability to deliver a higher percentage of our capital works program has a number of actions that need to take place, and one of those is certainly being more realistic and spreading works over multiple years to ensure that we allow that time. So when we can see it has all of these impediments in it, we should only be then coming to you and asking for enough money for a realistic in year one. The other one, which I think the council, it is really good to give the council a little bit of an update on this year, is I think the whole of the utilities and roading should be very proud about the state we are in come the end of July for the coming year compared to any other year, including the 10 I was in here before. We are well advanced with defining scope, getting that scope agreed with PDU who are going to deliver, and getting PDU underway with delivering those works. I think we're in the best state we've ever been. Now, I'm probably going to oversell my case a little bit here and maybe regret this in a year, but I am far more hopeful this year that we are in a really positive state to deliver our program this year, which we needed to be, and we accept that.
Not very much to say, but I'm really, really pleased this report has come to us. It helps us keep a much more realistic view on what our capital expenditure is going forward. I don't think it will help us very much with Standard & Poor's. However, I think it's been quite unfair how sometimes we look at it and say 73%, that's terrible, couldn't you guys have done better? But actually, you've actually had a lot of external matters that have impacted on that result. And this will give us a much more genuine target for the end of the year, and it gives us an idea going forward. And it's always hard. Do you pull the money forward? Do you leave it out? And we totally understand that with multi-year projects. But it is really good to see the improvements in this space, and I want to congratulate you, Don, and all the team who've worked on this project, because I really am seeing some light at the end of the tunnel on this issue and looking forward to the next report.
Echo my Councillor Barnett's comments. Good report.
It'll be done. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. As you can tell, the jug's on cue. So we'll have a 10-minute break and come back, and then we will come back. Yep, and then we'll have a further break just before we go into public excluded for that other item. Okay, welcome back. We'll get underway. Item 8.5, which is Rob and Rob, pages 455 to 482. Welcome, Rob and Rob.
Right, good afternoon, councillors. This report sets out the findings from a recent seismic strength investigation and seeks approval for additional budget and an accelerated procurement process to enable the project to be delivered. Council will be aware of the several iterations and changes to the project of the refurbishment of the service centre over recent years. The most recent change being in response to the financial pressures created by the pandemic, which resulted in a reduced scope and budget to 1.5 million. As part of the design process for this revised scope, routine structural reviews identified a change in engineering guidance, which meant that the assessed strength of the western first floor is now assessed at 40% of the new building standard. Although not a legal or health and safety issue as such in the near future, this reduced the seismic performance and in consideration to the reasonable concerns of staff and others, we have sought to limit access to this area until it is strengthened. Palfinic consultants have advised that the repair of the floor is best achieved through the installation of a carbon fibre polymer mat along with some other structural ties to the chambers area. In light of these additional costs, as well as recent further announcements in relation to Three Waters, we have reviewed the assumptions sitting behind the business case, and we consider that these assumptions still remain valid as potential for relocation of the Three Waters was accounted for in the scenarios tested earlier. The option to refurbish and extend the existing building remains significantly less expensive than the alternative option of moving to a different location. A condition assessment of the heating and ventilation system, along with the repair costs for the seismic upgrade, has led to the project steering group recommending to increase the budget for the project by $1 million to a total of $2.5 million. This includes an increase in contingency to provide greater confidence that any further unforeseen issues are able to be covered by the budget. Just like to cover off on the accelerated procurement process. Council will be aware that staff are now working again from home or in less than ideal workspaces in other council buildings. As such, the project steering group recommended an accelerated procurement process to get contractors on board as early as possible without losing a comparative process in relation to price, but also giving some preference to local suppliers as per the procurement policy. This is outside of our normal procurement policy guidelines, but Council can deviate from this in exceptional circumstances and ensure that the organisation can continue to deliver services to the community. The proposed procurement approach is covered in the following main points. The main contractor, we're looking for tenders from four main contractors that are currently on the new trades panel that has been independently established more recently. The seismic contractor, tenders are sought from two specialist contractors recommended by the structural engineer for this work. And the heating and ventilation and air conditioning tenders are sought from 5 contractors with 2 local suppliers identified, again based on recommendations from our services engineer. The rationale for the deviation from the policy is an increased pace to limit the time over which staff are in less than ideal working conditions. Use of a pre-qualified trades panel means that tenders have already been through a robust and comparative process and are of an appropriate quality. The ability to procure local suppliers where possible to enhance the economic recovery of the district is a part of the tendering process, noting that weighting is given to the main contractor who uses local suppliers. The selection of specialist contractors who are proven to be able to deliver the work are noted on the recommendation of our professional advisors. And finally, the seeking of tenders from a shortlist ensures that there is a price tension in the price to ensure that the council is able to obtain value for money. In short, the project steering group consider that these are compelling reasons for the accelerated procurement approach to this project. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Rob, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I almost got confused then. No further to add. That's pretty much a summary of where the two Robs have got to. So, thanks for that.
Councillor Redmond.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. On page 462 of Diligent, the key risks associated with the project are listed. Are these the risks during the refurbishment process or risks at conclusion of the project? I was concerned with the comments relating to staff and disruption, and I'm hoping it's during the refurbishment period before they go back to their space. Can you clarify that, please?
Yeah, you're correct. The third risk that we're talking about there, delay in project milestone leading to a further disruption to staff, that is during the construction process. That's right.
And teams do not adapt well to new environment. Is that the temporary environment or the new environment at conclusion?
That actually refers to the new environment, although it also perhaps also relates to the current and temporary environment as well. What we're very aware of, this is still a change process, so whether it's a good change or a bad change, it still has a disruptive effect. So we're very aware of that as we work through this.
Right, thank you. My second question is, by doing both works, the seismic strengthening and the refurbishment at the same time, two things: are we saving money by doing it, and if so, how much? And B, is it creating additional stress for staff with further and extended disruption?
So it's almost essential to do the seismic strengthening at the same time as the refurbishment, because we have to clear the area of the internal walls, strip the carpet and other works before we do the seismic strengthening, and that of course is what we do anyway for the refurbishment, and it would be quicker as a result. In terms of cost savings, it's always difficult to exactly calculate that, but generally the sort of thing I would say probably in terms of 10 or 15% of that establishment cost, being able to be combine the two contracts together.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you. Just a question, is there any likelihood that they might find further seismic faults in the structures or the floors once they take up the flooring? And another question, the HVAC upgrade, has that needed to be upgraded through because of the present conditions? I heard a whisper that that was more faulty than they originally thought.
So this is a refurbishment of an older building, so there is always the possibility that we will uncover defects or other issues. We've all renovated houses and done things like that. You know, it's the same thing. There are always the possibility of finding that. We've done so far work to try and minimise that risk, but I think that is also why we've suggested a greater contingency that we might normally on a project at this stage of maturity, to allow for those sort of unforeseen matters arising. So we shouldn't be naive that we won't find anything, but certainly we're doing our best to make sure that if we do, we've got enough money to cover it. In terms of your second question, in terms of the HVAC, the condition assessment that we've done, the mechanical plant is in reasonable condition, but it's old, and there are myriad of issues that it brings, and so there is some risk that if we did a smaller level of replacement and upgrade, that we may not be able to meet the performance requirements that would be reasonable for an office.
Probably, if I can just add to that somewhat. The history of this project goes back a number of years, and at least 3 or 4 years ago we identified that we were struggling in terms of the performance of the existing system, and that in some areas parts were difficult to obtain. All of those things, as we've gone on, get harder and harder to keep on top of. And so, yes, we are experiencing some ongoing failures and challenges here today to keep it working. So that's getting now to more of a critical point where those parts of the building in particular that are under a managed environment, that is a building management system, controlled environment, are actually very difficult to keep working properly. And certainly they are not efficient, and there are significant other impacts in terms of sustainability and those sorts of things. So it is age, and as a result of that age condition.
Further questions? I'm happy to move. Do we have a second? Seconded, Councillor Doody. Thank you. For me, this is a no-brainer. I think Rob left. It describes it well. I mean, it's an old villa sitting in a new street, and you know, when you lift the floorboards, the joists are gone, and that can happen, and we shouldn't be naive and think that may not happen. Hopefully it won't. Sometimes it's made out of good material, and that doesn't happen. So let's hope that that's the case. This is something that money won't be wasted. We need to do this to make sure that we cover off the health and safety of our staff. I think just about every councillor around here over the period of time that we've been discussing this has talked about the appalling conditions that staff have found themselves in through no fault of their own, and certainly not really through the fault of the council, through the situation that the building has evolved into with the amount of number of people in which we've done that. We have to put a stop sign at the end of that, and we have to fix what we can for now and move on as quickly as we can to make sure that the staff have as little disruption as they can and get the best out of something that we have, to then eventually move to another discussion down the track about where we go, what we do from there. But this in my view it just has to happen to make sure that everybody is in the best space that they can be in for this organisation to move forward in the way that it always has. We've always been leaders as far as councils go in what we do in our district. It should be no different for our staff. We should lead and make sure that they are in conditions that are perfectly acceptable for them to work in. So I think that this is something that we absolutely have to do, and that we need to do absolutely adequately to make sure that we are in front of it. Councillor Doody.
Thank you. You've just stolen some of my things I was going to say, but what I really would like to say is thank you very much, Rob, for what you have put together here, and we really very much appreciate the work and effort that you've put towards this, and also considering our staff, trying to do what's best for them as well. And I'd just like to do a big thanks to the staff that have had to move out, and the conditions that they're working in, that some of them are not particularly great because they're cramped in, but I'd just like to say a big thank you very much to them for putting up with what has to be done for the greater good of us all.
Any further speakers? Councillor Millings.
Just in my travels, I in the last little while, I was speaking to one person that said that they used to work at a building in town, beautiful, new, flash, modern, left that to come and work for us. And another person in a similar situation also said that, and I quote, "This is the worst building I've ever worked in, but they still want to work for the Waimakariri District Council. Our staff are our biggest asset. They are the reason why we have 2 back-to-back AA ratings, and we need to look after them and keep them safe and give them some decent accommodation. They want to work here, they want to live in the district, they want to work in the district, and we need to make that a bit more amenable for them." So I support this.
Councillor Stewart.
question on about the temporary accommodation 85K. Where's that? Is it whereabouts is the temporary accommodation?
We are just closing out on temporary accommodation leases and fit-outs. There are 3 properties that we are looking at, and the context of that is that we are looking at delivering this project in 4 separate stages. That is in addition to the current position while we are waiting. So in effect, there's 5 stages that have in terms of here and now, the next wee while, then the first stage of the project, and following through to the final one being the chambers. So temporary accommodation that we are closing out on our negotiations and fit-outs are Percival Street above the bakery. So that's a temporary 6 to 12 month lease there. Durham Street, just to adjacent to Mackenzie Williams, on the ground floor where Stuff newspaper have been located. That's looking at a longer term arrangement, given the project is no longer catering to the expansion of staff numbers that we have over the coming 4 or 5 years. We're looking at a 3-year lease with 2 rights of renewal of 1 year beyond that, so a 5-year term there. And the third premises are in Lamb House, which is the heritage building that was refurbished with the facade retained, the hotel, with a new building behind that, so we're upstairs there. So some of our challenges of getting in are around making sure our dates are there with the lessor, and the refurbishment work that we need to do in some cases, as well as the IT provision to make that happen. But all of those are now working their way through. So hopefully over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will be able to make all of those spaces available.
Thank you. I just really want to reiterate that I did make a comment that the staff were in 12 different places the other day, but it's actually only 8 different places currently, which is still quite a lot to cope with. And even then, when we get back into the refurbished building, it's not going to be complete. And I would really like to say to everybody that we really need to start planning to complete a proper civic precinct along with the library, which will take a few years to get underway, but I think we need to start fairly soon, because it will be 4 or 5 years, and we might have the roof needs to be replaced or something like that, but we need to keep moving on the plans of the civic precinct and the library combined as soon as we get this up and running.
Just might write a reply. We do have that civic precinct group that is working and doing exactly what Councillor Ward is talking about. So that will be there will be some preparations for the 10-year plan that will go in there, which is very, very soon. So just be aware that that's coming, and that'll be part of the discussions of the 10-year plan in whatever form that will take. But it's about the whole precinct in the first place, and the big building will become secondary to that, whatever is decided from there. So just as long as we're all aware of that. All right, I will put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 8.6, welcome Sarah, pages 483 to 495.
Thank you. The first report on remuneration. This report advises the remuneration rate for elected members from 1st July this year to 30th of June next year. There has been no changes to the remuneration rate this financial year from the Remuneration Authority. We're also required to review our expenses policy, which is forwarded to the Remuneration Authority, and we've made no changes to this policy that the Council adopted in November 2019, beginning of this term. I'll take the report as read and open for any questions.
Do we have any questions for Sarah? Appear to be none. Do we have a mover? Moved Councillor Blackie. Seconded Councillor Ward. Councillor Blackie.
No, nothing to argue about really.
Councillor Ward.
Do as we're told.
I won't argue either.
Any further speakers? Appear to be none. I'll put that. All those in favour? No. Head of yourself. Are those against? Carried. Thank you. Right, item 8.7.
Okay, the
Again.
representation review. So every 6 years we're required to review the representation arrangement for the district, which approximately is an 18-month project with some set timelines. At this point, we're not anticipating great change, perhaps minor boundary adjustments. However, as we assess the census data that's released in late September and progress through the process of community feedback on the number of wards, elected members, names of wards and boards, the whole process will become clearer. To assist with formulating the way the special consultative procedure questions to the community will develop the council views, we will start with a working party. So today we're seeking 3 councillors, 1 from each ward, to join the working party. The mayor will be a member of that working party, and we're also seeking 1 board member to be appointed by the boards from each area to be on that working party. The working party will report back to the council at various stages through the project, and then late next year we will get to a point that the council will have considered all the information, hearings. They'll make a recommendation that will go out to the community again with what the final thing is. We wait until there's any appeals, and then that will take us through to about Christmas, and then the following January everything is sent to the Local Government Commission. They assess our whole process, and then if there are appeals they will make the final decision on the overall representation of the district. So happy to take any questions.
Councillor Blackie.
Sarah, item F, could we alter that slightly to include the deputy mayor as of right and exclude him from being a councillor on the relevant community board?
We have the mayor representing the at-large part of the district, and the councillors we're really looking at per ward for that representation of per ward, and the same with the community boards. It's entirely up to the council on how they decide on that. There is a balance on a working party size as well, and ultimately the feedback will come back to the council to make any further decisions on. But it's up to the council today if they wish to amend that. The deputy mayor may become on there as a ward councillor. So.
Councillor Dooley, you have a
Thank
question?
you. Just asking the question, would you be interested in people, councillors around there, putting their names forward as of interest?
What we're seeking today is 3 councillors, 1 from each ward.
Right, okay.
And whether you wish to break into a workshop or take a moment to have all your names sort of discussed is entirely up to the chair and yourselves.
Can either just happy to go. Right, we'll adjourn to a workshop. We are now adjourned to a workshop. What we're seeking is names.
Yeah.
No,
I am too. Yeah.
and I am too. Yep, that's fine. Yes,
Yeah, me too.
Wendy, you and Phil.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Only one.
Yeah, I've got that. Yep.
Yeah.
Are you interested in it?
Yes.
Okay, Neville and Philip from
Can
One
I
of the
also
things,
just point out that the meetings will be most likely held on Thursday mornings, and that's partly the workflow and the mayor's availability as well. So you do need to be available on a Thursday morning.
That's fine.
and the other thing is too that you want some new people. Sarah, it doesn't matter if everyone's new, and I mean new, but it would be kind of good to have some experience, people, someone that's been there before. Is that advisable or not?
Yes, a good mix of fresh new ideas, thinking outside the square, as well as understanding some of the process.
Okay.
It is very much a numbers exercise at the end of the day.
It is.
That's true. So
Yeah.
Paul was eliminated from the discussion and a name in the hat.
So you've now got, just be aware also of gender balance.
Yeah,
I'd
I'll-
like to bring that up.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I'll make sure that there is a gender balance.
Balance.
Perhaps a bit of it'd be nice if there was
It's going to be hard to get a gender balance with 3 people.
Yeah, exactly.
No, with the men being one.
Yeah. Oh.
On the
Oh, I don't know how that's going to work.
If we were to include the deputy mayor along with the mayor as an appointment, that would solve the problem in already.
I'm sorry, I totally disagree with that because it unbalances the working party. You need to only have one representative from each ward.
Or only have 2 members and they still have one representative.
Agreed, but you're going to be elected, and so if there's 2 from
Excuse
one
me, hang on a minute.
side-
Can you use your light, please?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, well, just because he didn't, you can.
This is not about who did or didn't. Can you please use your lights? Right, Councillor Doody.
Thank you. Yes, I've put my name forward because I would like to represent the top half of the Waimakariri.
The western.
Right, well, we're gonna need to make a decision because equally, Councillor Mailings is going to say I need to represent the now, and again, what Philip is raising is the fact that you do have 2 community boards. Now, we're not talking about community boards; we're talking about council. So we need to make sure, because each community board will have a representative as well. That may very well be a councillor. That says it can't be. Right. Okay.
My reason for interest in this is that I took quite an interest in our last representation review from outside of council for our current ward structure. And as our ward is quite interestingly constructed of, like, say, the Ohoko subdivision as an example, we hold 1/4 of the population, sorry, we hold 1/2 of the population and 1/4 of the area. And it's a fast-growing area, and I think that we really need to pay some very close attention to that and how it's represented.
Anyone can attend the workshop? Simple, really. Show of hands. Okay, so for the ward of, we have both councillors for the ward of Oxford and Mirabelle. Maybe it will be Mirabelle one day, but and so show of hands for Wendy. 1, 2 there, 2 there, and for Nikki. Right, so be it. Kaipo is Philip and myself. Show of hands for Philip. 1 there, 2 there. Show of hands for Neville. Neville, and that's Neville. Now, I just want to reiterate there, anyone is able to attend the workshop and have input. It's just around that consensus voting that that will be. And no, we're not having a vote for Paul because he's got it already. I'll put. Any further questions on that report? Appear to be none. Do we have a mover inserting the names Neville, Councillor Atkinson, Councillor Mealings and Councillor Williams? Right, do we have a mover? Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Barnett. Any discussion? There is none. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 8.8, pages 8.8, pages 506 to 516. Mr. Palmer? Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Oh, I can sign it as well. So thank you. This is a report which reflects a series of recommendations from Greater Christchurch Partnership to the Council about both the partnership's priorities and funding arrangements that have been proposed, and I believe we have talked about these in a previous staff briefing session. Firstly, in terms of Greater Christchurch Partnership priorities, they've identified 5 areas that they think we should focus on as priorities for the coming year. About developing Greater Christchurch 2050, which is a vision and plan for the Greater Christchurch area, and engaging the community about that. Secondly, focusing on the urban growth agenda and trying to partner with government to actually get genuine partnership with government on matters that are critical to Greater Christchurch, which at the moment we don't engage in as well as we perhaps would like to. The third area is strengthening relationships with mana whenua. While we have 3 representatives from the iwi and they represent hapu and runanga within the Greater Christchurch area, we don't maximise the value of that relationship to the extent we could, and there's a desire to further build that and ensure that there is stronger alignment. The fourth area is the commitment to what would be seen as business as usual, the Our Space plan of work, the transport initiatives that are many and varied, whether they be public transport, mass rapid transit, the construction of the program of works that will see for us the completion of the Northern Corridor and making that operate and work successfully. They're still really important to Greater Christchurch and the partners, specifically for us trying to promote the regional policy statement change and therefore the district plan change that will enable zoning in Rangiora and Kaiapoi is a clear priority for us, but there are other matters across the partnership were equally important, and they're now complicated by the MPS on urban development and whether they're going to be further complicated by any RMA reform, time will tell. And the final element of focus is around recovery from COVID, and we're not quite sure what we're recovering from yet. And if there is needed to be an extensive recovery program, particularly the value of Greater Christchurch 2050 in terms of setting a vision and plan for Greater Christchurch is seen as really important. The Greater Christchurch 2050 vision and plan was a piece of work that is seen as essential by the partnership, but is one that hasn't yet been hadn't been taken into account in any budgets. And it is urgent, and the partnership agreed that unless that is progressed, then the clear and visible leadership that is needed for Greater Christchurch won't be provided. After an assessment of what's needed to actually develop that vision and plan and engage the community, the partnership were advised that it's probably in the order of $1.5 million that is needed, but was in nobody's budget. Through discussion and suggestion, ECAN have taken up the offer of acting as banker for that project and seeking and paying for the costs of it, but then recovering those from Christchurch, Selwyn and Waimakariri in parts equal to their agreed contributions over 5 years. For us, that's in the order of about $166,000. That will need to be factored into our long-term plan budget when that comes back to you. There is a little bit of capacity in that budget at the moment, but it will depend on what other priorities Greater Christchurch also identify, whether that be urban growth partnership priorities or the continuing business as usual priorities, which are still reasonably significant and onerous. We think that was a really good solution, and one that ECAN has resolved about 10 days ago to sign up to, and Christchurch City likewise last week have agreed to this as well. Today we consider it and Selwyn considers that matter next week. It's worth noting that we will need, as part of the LTP plan process, to actually be reflecting on what is the value, the further contributions required to actually deliver on our Greater Christchurch vision and objectives, and that will come back to you. And as part of what were some reasonably tense negotiations over funding, there is also a recognition by the partnership that the current funding allocation perhaps isn't the most equitable across Greater Christchurch. ECAN and Christchurch both pay 37.5% of the costs, and Waimakariri and Selwyn pay 12.5%, and the partnership has asked the Chief Executive Group by the end of the year to provide a further review of that, and that may, in all likelihood, that will see a request for us to be making a greater contribution in that space. So there is my sense of the partnership at the moment is that it is a good space. The partnership committee is working well together and is quite excited or keen to see the work of Greater Christchurch 2050 done, which I think, the final comment, the 2050 work, while it will have a 4 wellbeings focus, at the moment we run the risk of Christchurch being known pretty much not for anything particularly spectacular, and will become a little bit more of has the risk of becoming a retirement village for Canterbury without us accentuating what the real positives and opportunities are for Christchurch. And to that end, there is work being developed in an economic space about what are being termed super nodes. So creating 4 super nodes for Greater Christchurch, one around food and fibre, and utilising the skill that is and technology and application of that research skill and technology to our benefit, that is particularly housed in the universities, the CRIs and the broader Canterbury rural landscape or hinterland. So food and fibre. The second one is health research. There is a significant health research and applied research community already in Christchurch. The third, which is an evolving one, which surprises me, but a number are quite excited about the potential, is actually aerospace and what we can do in both aeronautical and aerospace development. And the fourth is one we hide under our bushel quite a bit in Canterbury. All of those need to be supported by high quality IT. We currently have about 15,000 IT workers, software developers in Greater Christchurch working, and you wouldn't know it when you look around. We have the potential to actually both be building those other super nodes and talking up the quality of our IT community and the opportunity that's here to actually create both economic opportunity, increase average wage, which is actually quite low relative to other metropolitan areas in New Zealand, and actually building something that says, yes, when you think about Christchurch, you think about these things, as well as it being a great place to live for all of the other environmental and social benefits that it provides. So I think it's a really important piece of work. Yes, it costs a lot of money. There is quite an engagement plan that is going with this that will come out end of September and October to engage the community about what it thinks of the ideas that are being developed, and by early next year we should be in a place to have that 2050 program of work drawing to a close. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions on the report or the recommendations.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, $1.7 million odd. Is that just all consultants, bureaucratics, or is that paying for staff to run these meetings? What's actually going? There's no physical stuff that's actually coming out there that I can see anyway. And I presume Christchurch will provide their staff and their councillors when they want to. We will as well. We won't be charging for that. So where's that $1.7 million going towards? You know, is there anything physical?
Does it build anything other than a vision and a plan and a community engagement around it? No, it doesn't. And the question you raised is one that the partnership raised, the chief executives raised, the senior managers have raised as well, and asked for a breakdown of the costs that related to that. It is a combination of staff and consultant cost that is makes that up. It sounds a significant sum of money. Not that that's necessarily the baseline that we should be thinking about, but most of the other significant planning and engagement pieces of work that we have had in Greater Christchurch and through recovery, well, since the earthquake and recovery, and our red zone plan was an example of that. That was about $1 million, and that's the cheapest one that was delivered across Greater Christchurch through to Christchurch's red zone plan in the order of about $5 million, I believe, Regenerate spent. So it feels eye-watering. I get that. There is a team of about 5 people who are working away on it at the moment, and there will be a whole lot more coming to it as the program builds.
Can I just add to that? If you don't have this plan, you can kiss your government funding goodbye, because the government requires it, that we work together and that we form the plans together. And if you have a look around certainly North Island areas and places that have these plans in place, and have a look at where the government's funding is going, and I'm not talking about COVID, I'm talking about normal day work. What is that? At normal day's work, if you don't have these plans, then last time we did this plan was 154 million or 54 million, I can't remember which, in roading that came, yeah. So that's just, yeah.
I wasn't saying against it. I was just trying to think how we can justify that amount of money, because it's an awful lot of money for bureaucrats.
Thank you. I notice number little 3 is to strengthen the partnership with mana whenua and iwi. What happens, we've got mahi tahi and, you know, executive meeting monthly. What do the other councils have with it's Nai Tau, Nai Tuhu?
There are different arrangements in place. ECAN has a 2-year program where the 10 Papatipu Runanga chairs meet with the ECAN Council reasonably regularly. I'm not sure, I can't recall the frequency, but they have an engagement at that level. Christchurch has 6 Papatipu Runanga, including Ngāi but the best of them, the rest are mainly around the peninsula. So they meet again 6 weekly, yeah, pretty regularly. Again, that is the chairs of those runanga. Others probably don't have the same level of regular engagement as us, would be my sense of it, but I know Kaikoura, having had a bit of a rocky road in their relationship with the 2 runanga that they work with, they are now putting a lot more effort into that relationship and are meeting quite often. So it's you know, each are different. And the issue with Greater Christchurch is there are 6 Papatipu Runanga that we need to work with across Greater Christchurch, and make sure that we are connected. We have 3 representatives of iwi who do represent some of those runanga, but not necessarily all of them. And how to ensure that the aspirations which iwi and mana whenua have for the Greater Christchurch region are aligned, and make sure that we're working in their best interests as well as, you know, as part of the broader community's best interests. So we are meeting as a group of chief executives with iwi mana whenua representatives next 17th, that is, to talk about how that partnership can further be strengthened. They're quite positive about it, and even just as of yesterday, talking about 3 waters, which we might talk about more when there's an agenda item later in the papers, to talk about that and the way in which we're trying to build and strengthen relationship with mana whenua.
Comments. Is there any articulation from mana whenua about what would their preferred solution would be to this engagement, or how they see the shape of it? Or is that too early?
It's possibly too early, but what they do want to be involved is early and deeply and in a genuine partnership sense, and the thought of them being viewed as a stakeholder is something which upsets them. They are not just any other party. Simon has a comment there too.
Probably also the specific outcome that I think they're going to seek most out of this is housing. And we are, with Maori Reserve 873, possibly the most interested and affected area in that conversation. And I think actually if through the GCP work we could get some traction in some of the things that we want to and frankly need to do in terms of MR 873. One other very quick comment: if you recall the kind of tenor of the RMA reform announcement last week, then this is an investment in the future with mana whenua, because the relationship in planning terms will only become more and more significant over time. And as you know, those folk work on relationships, and this is an investment in the future in that regard.
Nikki.
Just about that amount of money that we were just talking about, that everybody's eyes watered a little bit with. Now, it was my understanding as well, am I wrong here, that amount also includes money towards raising awareness, as in like consultation, advertising, whatnot, for just what the Greater Christchurch Partnership is, because most people out there have no idea. They haven't actually heard of it, and they don't know who we are, what we do, and what we're trying to achieve.
So just to be clear, the cost of the GCP 2050 project is estimated at 1.5 million. There is some funding available within its existing kitty, so we need about another 1.18 million is what is being sought. But yes, it is, and that funding is for all of those things, as well as trying to tell the story of Greater Christchurch and demonstrating greater visible leadership at the moment, apart from the partners. Not many people, other than those who are deeply interested, not many people actually know about the work of the Greater Christchurch Partnership, or the value that it is and should be bringing to Greater Christchurch.
Because I think until we get some traction with our people that, again, who and what Greater Christchurch Partnership is, we are not going to get any traction with the central government on these projects. We're not going to get their attention if we can't get our own people's attention. So,
Good question.
I do believe that is good to know that there is. Thank you for answering my question, Jim. That there's some money
There is a
in
myriad of recommendations here. Someone prepared to move? Moved, Councillor Bryan. I'm happy to second. Councillor Bryan.
Well, to me, this no-brainer has been used a few times today. This is a no-brainer in the interests of the partnership in Greater Christchurch. I can't add any more than that. It's unfortunate the amount of money, but if you get a group of chief executives and a team sit down and say this is the amount of money that we need to invest to get this project operating as we want it to operate and extolling the virtues of the Greater Canterbury Partnership, then I'm not going to argue with a group of very experienced chief executives, as I say.
Yeah, just to add to that, I sitting around the regeneration table in the very first part when, and certainly Mr. Markham was there as well, we had a budget of 900,000 and we thought our contribution to that was 600,000 to produce a recovery plan. And I can still remember Benicia Smith sitting across the table from us and said, I don't know what you're thinking because we've never delivered a plan under $1 million yet. And we did it. So gives you some idea of the eye-watering numbers that go around these plans and things, necessary or not. I'm unsure. Wasted money sometimes, or best money again. I'm a little unsure, but what I can tell you is that it is the necessary beast of democracy, and this is one of those things that I think that we in this district will actually benefit from. We do benefit from the Greater Christchurch Partnership. I have no doubt in my mind about that, being part of it and being on the inside. At that table, we do benefit from that and from some of the uncomfortable discussions that we have around that table. We have come out okay just about every time. So, there's further work to be done, and there will still be uncomfortable conversations to be had. But this sets us on the same railway track as everybody else, I would hope. Any further speakers? Councillor Doody.
And this is an opportunity to promote the whole of wider Canterbury for job seekers, especially those that are professionals that have come from overseas, that have got, they're cashed up and ready to somewhere to reside and work. And I mean, it was just in the paper the other day about the American couple that, well, one was New Zealand, and they came over, they've settled in Christchurch, and they've chosen Christchurch as a great place to be. And this is what it's all about, is to make our area known as a good place to live and bring up your children. for me, it's just the no-brainer to promote.
Any further speakers? No. Councillor Bryan? Thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 9, nothing referred from the community boards that we have on our agenda. Item 10.1, health and safety. Mr. Palmer, 517 to 527.
Thank you. Other than noting the issues we've had with Rangiora Service Centre, which you're well aware of, there are no other matters to be brought to your attention in this report that should cause you concern.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any questions? Councillor Stewart?
Well, it's termed a near miss, but the staff member that was getting into the Kaiapoi wastewater treatment plant without a key for the bird counts, I thought that went out to someone else. But were they getting through after the new fencing?
I honestly don't know.
Eh? Yeah, I've got it too. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's no, sorry, it's a city council staff member that was getting in. That was the guy that's meant to be to do the botulism dead bird counts, and we did the fencing. So he must have been hooping through the old, or is that the new fencing? I'd be a bit worried because we've just upgraded all that, and they've just found that he was getting in without a key.
Yes, don't know. There's still an open matter that needs some further investigation. Don't know. I don't know.
Look, rather than debate that here, I think Mr. Palmer will bring that back to us next time. I think that's the easiest way. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, my concerns with the worker at the pool, was that worker in the water when they had the fit? The seizure?
Don't believe so.
Because there'd be a
No,
concern for
Yeah, I don't believe.
if that person couldn't call out for a lifeguard and was in the water, that was all.
Yeah.
It'd be a concern.
Noted. Thank you. Councillor Blackie?
Chickens that nearly got onto the road have had counselling and seen the error of their ways.
They've now crossed the road safely on the other side.
Councillor Barnett?
Well, mine was a little bit more serious about the chickens. Just the response that they don't deal with chickens. Surely if there's a hazard to life, someone should deal with it. So that response is, do they call police? What happens? Because it's dangerous.
Well, it's dangerous for the chickens.
Do we bring out the shotgun? But I mean, someone should deal with it. Animal control shouldn't just say they don't deal with it, surely. Is it an NZTA matter? Is it a police matter? No, it's a safety matter.
Look, I think...
No, I'm just asking Mr. Palmer's opinion on that, because I think the response needs to be better than that.
I think, look, there's a question raised. I think that both of those, a short line and the next one, Mr. Palmer might just help us through.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I think that's just probably the best. Moved.
Just on that,
just one moment.
Just on that chicken one, you have to be careful what we're talking about there, because we've got the pukakikus running around by the Skew Bridge and a lot of places there, so we could create a nightmare. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Williams. Moved Councillor Ward, seconded Councillor Doody. Councillor Ward, do you wish to?
No, thank you.
No, thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right. We have a series of... I'll put some glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. We have a series of minutes for information there. Is someone prepared to move on block 11.1 to 11.4? Moved Councillor Barnett, seconded Councillor Ward. Is there any discussion around those? I will put those, all those in favour. Against? Carried. Thank you. The Community Board minutes for information. Is there anything that needs to be raised from anyone around the table on any of those minutes? Councillor Williams. While you're looking for that, I have no, number 13, I have no reports for information. And we'll leave that open, Councillor Williams, while you're looking for that. And item 14.1, the Mayor's Diary. Moved by Councillor Blackie, seconded by Councillor Redmond. Is there any discussion on the Mayor's Diary? Appears to be none. I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, we'll go back. Councillor Williams, have you found your spot? Yes. So is that's been referred to, the community board's dealing with that rather than us?
Well, they didn't because Councillor Barnett wasn't there, so took notice because the person, Ryan O'Loughlin, was unsure when about the
Okay, so that, but that's been dealt with by the community board? Yes. Okay, thank you. Rightio. All right, can we have a mover for those minutes from 12.1 to 12.4? Moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Stewart. Is there any discussion? Appears to be none. I will put those, all those in favour. Against? Carried. Now, in light of time, can we please, even though we need our updates, can we please keep them brief so that we can move into the public excluded, particularly with the extra item that we have on there. So just brief comments, if we may. Councillor Stewart on the on the water management strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. There is quite a bit of stuff that has happened in my portfolios, so I'll just rip through them. The Canterbury Water Management Strategy, there is, ECAN has proposed a new term of reference for the function of zone committees, moving from planning to implementation, and ECAN has a proposed letter of shared priorities, which I presume Mr. Palmer is going to come to us as a workshop or a briefing, because we have to, as a council, tick off some of this. So, in the light that you'll be...
Land and water.
Oh, is it? Oh, goody. Yeah, so there's, as I said, a change of terms of reference for the zone committees. They are asked to create an action plan, and yeah. So I'll leave that. There was also a presentation or a request from the ECAN Youth Ropu, who is a group of young people who are interested in joining the zone committee with a seat on the zone committee representing young people and voting rights. They've already got a position on the Christchurch West Melton committee. They say they gave quite a good presentation yesterday. They would like the voice of youth to be reflected in the decisions on water management, which are going to affect them and their future. So again, I think that'll come to us to talk about as well. We had a 6-monthly update on all the work that ECAN and WDC have done implementing the Zone Implementation Program Addendum. And I'd just like to congratulate WDC staff who aren't here but have done a really good job. ECAN is catching up, and you'd like to know that the ECAN have spent 150,000 on 15,000 plants in the Silverstream loop. That's that 27-kilometre loop track that we've been talking about for years, and they're going to get it finished in the next 5 years. Michael Bate came with some video on the Taranaki stream, quite a concerning section of downstream of Ravenswood, and it looks like someone's been out there with a spray again, and it is through the private area of the Ravenswood development, downstream from McDonald's. And he had pictures of lovely weed, and then nothing, and then further down more weed growing. So that's being investigated. On the biodiversity front, I and many other councillors helped with the plantings in the Honda Forest for the last couple of Saturdays. The Zone Committee set up a biodiversity subgroup, which is just getting its legs. And one of the interesting things that came out there was considering that the Community Service Awards that we have actually extends from, and I know sometimes there have been groups, but actually commend a biodiversity project within the region. We have an award for the best. Now, it can either come under, I suggested, Community Service Awards, or that we could set up an award, which that group was quite keen on, to celebrate the very best biodiversity project within the district. And tomorrow night at KPA in the Coast Guard at 5:30, Sophie Ellen and Adrian Meredith from ECAN will be talking about the Kaiapoi River. So if you want to hear the latest, come along there. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Sandra. International relations. As you can imagine, it's not a huge, big, busy time, apart from knowing when borders are open. Now, in saying that, we had both Dan and I had a conversation with Freddie de Klerk, and he is well and going to start working on some relationships between Kaiapoi High School and a high school over there. So where they are in, and you know the areas better than I, Jim, but in the areas where they directly are, they don't have a high school, so they actually, their students go outside of there to go to high school, but trying to hook up certainly Kaiapoi High School in the early stages of through the RSA in Kaiapoi to get their relationship back off the ground. That was working until, unfortunately, the loss of Kevin Brown. So they hope to get that going again. So that's me on that one. Councillor Blackie, regeneration.
Dredging is finished last Wednesday, and Duncan's pleased with the result of that. The piles in the river start work tomorrow or Thursday. Thursday, I think it is. So that's underway. As Sandra's just said, Honda Forest has had 3 planting days now, quite well attended. 1 more to go. Cure Boat Club is coming down, although there's been no action in the building for several days now. It seems to have stopped, but the demolition's well underway. In the east area, roads, all the roads will be finished before the end of September. As you know, the weather's got in the way of them a bit, but they're coming along. The Norman Kirk Reserve, the whole area, we're starting to think about an opening for that. Just put your thinking caps on as to what we've got a problem with fitting it in amongst all the other things in the district. But we'd like to have an hour and a half long sort of a ceremony come demonstration game on the new playing fields, whatever. Just have a thought about what you think would be good for that and when we could fit it in. And that's me.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
Look, I guess I too will be brief. We've already heard extensively what has been happening in the climate change space today, so I'll leave that at that. And aside from my question at the beginning of the meeting regarding the sustainability steering group, I'm going out to community boards, which I hope that all of the community board agendas will be amended so that will be included in their agenda items, because we need to appoint a member from each community board, and that needs to happen sooner than later so we can get this off the ground. So I'd very much like to see that happen, please. I have received a couple emails from the public supporting the creation of that sustainability steering group. You probably did too as well, Al, I take it, which is good. I've heard nothing but positive things from the community in regards to that space. And other than that, over the last month, I attended a meeting of Resilient Huranui, which also Councillor Redmond and Grant Edge from ECAN also attended, which was really fascinating. I did send you guys all through the copy of the report that came through to that. It is interesting bedtime reading, but it is well worth the read. It's quite interesting. They're having another meeting on the 20th of August at 7:30 at Amberley School, if anybody wants to go and have a look. But I think that the creation of a group like that is something that would be really good for us to have here in this district. They're very well attended. There were 60 people there. So, you know, there's obviously interest, and that's in Hurunui. So, but the subject of the next one is actually going to have a speaker that is talking about how another council has combined regional climate modeling and stakeholders' insights to support decision making there. So it could be interesting for us. But anyhow, that is all I have to say. So thanks.
Question, Councillor Butter?
So, Chair, just with your indulgence, from a COVID response agenda item we had before, I didn't quite signal you quick enough, but just to note, there's a social recovery workshop on 9 till 12 this week in Woodend about COVID social recovery that all members are invited to attend, and can talk to Nikki Carter if they'd like to attend.
Thank you for that.
So that's Thursday it is, 9 till 12 at Woodend Community Centre.
Perhaps you might send just a quick note to councillors on that, if you wouldn't mind, Adrian. Thank you. Right. I have no questions. I have no urgent general business. Now, we are going to move into committee. Could we have a mover for what's moved by Councillor Barnett and seconded by Councillor Blackie? We'll just make sure we are now in committee. Oh, sorry, I'll put that. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We're now in committee. So just make sure the live stream there is now cut. Now, how long do you want to have a look at this, the paper you have in front of you? I'm in your hands here. I mean, we can do it in 10 or we can do it in half an hour. It's your call. I want to make sure that everybody's got the information they need from the information that's in front of them. So your call. Let me know. What is it? Those that want 10 minutes, hands up. Who wants 10? 1. Who wants half an hour? Who wants 20 minutes? 20 minutes. 1. Sorry. Of the 10, 20 or half an hour. Make up your mind. Yep, shovel ready. Okay. Okay. 20 minutes we've got, right? So grab a cup of tea or whatever, and then we're back here on the dot.